So the members of the company and other friends financed his period of recuperation in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. Here he regained his health and in 2 years was able to go back to the theater for 6 months. His long stay in the pine forests gave him 2 ideas. 1. To take the fresh, fragrant odor of the pines to people who couldn't get to the pine woods. The other, to build up a business that would support him after he left the theater. He decided that soap was the product that would suit his purpose, and he experimented with many formulas before he found one which would actually hold the fragrance of the pine needles. After searching around a bit, he discovered a man who would make the soap for him in quantities. However, he, Billy B. Van, would have to go out and sell it. At first, he laughed at the idea of a comedian becoming a salesman. Then he realized that that was what he had been doing all during his show life, selling. He had been selling himself to his audience night after night. It should be easier to sell soap, he reasoned. So each morning he filled his pockets with samples of his soap and started ringing doorbells. There were difficulties. There always are. The druggist didn't know his soap and wouldn't stock it, the jobbers wouldn't move it, and he had no money for advertising. Suddenly the idea came to him that he could introduce his soap through the hotels. Most of his life had been spent in hotels and he knew hotel managers from one end of the country to the other. But the hotel managers thought it a huge joke, Billy B. Van selling soap. He soon found that there was no shortcut to prosperity selling to friends. He finally secured permission to place a trial order in a hotel. Around each cake of soap he wrapped a circular stating, "This soap will keep everything clean but your conscience." A coupon was attached to the circular which read, "Dear Billy, I like your soap. Send me 6 cakes. Here's your $1." The idea worked like a charm. Many orders came from the hotel's guests. In this way, Billy B. Van had put the reverse English on direct mail advertising. As he had no money to write to prospects, he arranged for them to write to him. This was the opening wedge in the merchandising of the Pine Tree Soap. In less than 4 years, he had performed a merchandising miracle. Today, he has a lucrative business up in the White Mountains where the pine trees send out their clean, healthy fragrance. The point of this story is not, however, that Billy B. Van, one-time showman, became a successful soap manufacturer, but that by doing the obvious thing he made money. So many people foolishly suppose that the only ideas that are any good are the clever ones, which nobody ever thought of before. The truth is that the ideas that make the biggest money are usually those which are only waiting for somebody to pick them up, just as Billy B. Van picked his pine tree soap idea out of the air of the New Hampshire mountains. There were many brands of soaps on the market when Billy B. Van started to sell his soap, but as he found out, there is always room for another product, if it has quality and answers a specific need. Knapp specialized in pressed chicken. In every farming community there is an opportunity to start a pressed chicken business. No skill and very little capital is required. You simply contract with the farmers and poultry raisers in your community for their chickens when they become too old to lay and too tough to eat. Because they are such tough old birds, you don't pay much for them. Then you buy or borrow a steam pressure cooker, and you are in the pressed chicken business. That there is good money to be made quickly in such a business is demonstrated by the experience of the Knapps, Eaton County, Michigan, not far from Lansing. The Knapps have a poultry farm. In addition to selling eggs, there is a capacity of 2,000 laying hens at the farm. Quite a few chickens are also sold, mostly broilers. However, at the end of the breeding season there are naturally a number of old hens and stags which must be marketed, for which only the lowest prices can be obtained. After handling the leftover stock in this manner for some time, the idea occurred to them that they might be able to make a profit by cooking the old birds and selling them as pressed chicken. The chickens for this purpose are best cooked in a pressure cooker, as cooking under pressure requires only from 30 to 40 minutes, whereas cooking in an open kettle requires from 2 to 3 hours. In addition to reducing the time spent in cooking, the pressure method of cooking produces a much richer product than the open kettle method, as the additional water required in the latter method naturally reduces the rich stock. Having a pressure cooker, Mrs. Knapp was able to save the cost of the extra cooking time. After the chicken is thoroughly cooked, the meat is cut into cross sections. To reduce the length of muscle shreds, seasoned to taste, some seasoning is added during cooking, the chicken stock is added, and a tablespoonful of plain gelatin. The extra gelatin helps to keep the mold firm and makes for easier slicing of the loaf when it has set. The molds should be greased to prevent the contents from sticking, and when filled they are placed in the refrigerator to set. In addition to making plain loaves, Mrs. Knapp also adds sliced vegetables, olives, the riced white and yolks of hard-boiled eggs, etc. By preparing the loaf in layers, a very attractive summer dish can be made. To form this loaf, the chicken should be cooked in the usual way, the white meat separated from the dark meat and each kind cut fine or run through a food chopper. The yolks and whites of several hard-boiled eggs should be chopped up separately and each seasoned well. Then the 4 ingredients, the white meat, dark meat, Egg yolks and egg whites should be mixed with the chicken stock which has been cooked down thick enough to gel. The white and dark meat and the yellow and white egg should then be arranged in layers, pressed in a pan or jar and allowed to set overnight. Adding water to the stock results in a larger quantity of food, but of course, the product brings a lower price. In a quality market, a loaf should sell for 50 cents a pound. As a 5-pound male bird, at the usual 45% loss, should dress out to about 2 3/4 pounds, the return on one bird would be about $1.28. By adding water and doubling the amount, a product would result which could be sold for about 25 cents a pound. Although the addition of water would make a loaf not nearly so rich, the return per bird would be the same. Whether to dilute the product or put up a richer loaf depends entirely upon the market. If a quality market can be developed and you can secure 50 cents a pound for the loaf, it means making as much money on fewer customers and, therefore, less selling effort. However, if the trade prefers a lower price and the diluted product, there is nothing to do but cater to your market. Handkerchiefs for the Chinese. Florence Rochester was a secretary in the Attorney General's office at Topeka, Kansas. But Mrs. Rochester needed more money. To appease both the need for more cash and to do something more artistic than copy legal briefs, she began making dainty little lace handkerchiefs in her spare time. She found ready sale for them among her friends. She spent as much time as necessary to turn out just the kind of handkerchiefs she liked, bought as expensive material as she wanted, and charged for the handkerchiefs accordingly. That was back in 1926. It was not long before these friends began showing their handkerchiefs to their friends. The demand for Rochester handkerchiefs grew. Before she realized it, Mrs. Rochester was in the handkerchief business. When orders began to pile up and she no longer was able to make the handkerchiefs and hold her regular job, she talked over the matter with her husband, a civil engineer for a railroad company, and he advised her to quit her job and concentrate on handkerchiefs. She did. She saw that if she built up the business she now was determined to have, she must sell to stores rather than depend on sales direct. She called on 2 nearby department stores with samples. She sold orders to both. She went back home and opened her factory in her own home. It was the same old story of the world beating a path to the door of the person with quality merchandise, except that Mrs. Rochester did not wait for this path to be beaten. She went out and told merchants about her handkerchiefs. Today Mrs. Rochester not only sells handkerchiefs to merchants in every state in the country except 3, but to foreign countries swell. Early in 1934 she opened a branch factory in China to expedite export business. Even big league pitchers put their spare time to work. Here is Lou Garland of the Los Angeles Angels at work in his shop making lamps out of broken baseball bats. The shades used on the lamps are autographed by his teammates and other baseball players. Start a pie bakery. 5 years ago in Benton Harbor, Michigan, the John Myers started a pie bakery. If you want to buy cake, cookies, bread, donuts, you have to go elsewhere to make your purchases. The Myers idea was to do one thing superlatively well, and they succeeded in baking pies that are good enough to keep people coming back for more. The market for their pies consists of hotels, restaurants and the nearby summer resorts. Quite a few are sold direct to consumers at 35 cents a pie. The usual demand in any American community for good pie has enabled the Myers to build up a profitable business, keep up a nice home which they own, have a car, and provide a comfortable living. There is a limitless market for pies, as practically every other man who enters a restaurant orders pie even though he knows it may not be particularly good. Just why there are so few good pie bakers in a country where dessert generally means pie, is one of the great unsolved mysteries. There is really no competition for the person who has the knack of baking pies like those mother used to make. $100 per month with felt work. Ruth G. Jones, a widow living in San Antonio, needed money and needed it quickly. She had had no commercial or business experience of any kind prior to her marriage. She had no special ability or talent. What could she do? One day she heard the son of a friend complain that he was unable to find anyone who could properly cut out letters and sew them on his baseball uniform. That gave Mrs. Jones an idea. She investigated and found that none of the sporting goods stores in the city had equipment for furnishing this service. There was, she found, a little shop that did this felt work, so she went over and had a talk with the proprietor. The outcome was that she took over the shop, equipped it properly, and went out after business. The only experience Mrs. Jones had had in cutting or designing felt was when she cut out a few pennants for herself and friends at college. Yet with a modern sewing machine, a pair of good shears, some sharp razor blades and a small assortment of felt, she was ready for business. She called on all the sporting goods dealers and sporting goods departments in the city. She told the managers about her service and asked them to cooperate with her, pointing out that they would be rendering their customers a service by sending them to a place which was equipped to design and sew on any sort of letters or emblems wanted on uniforms. Most of the dealers simply send the uniform purchasers to Mrs. Jones, and the transaction thereafter is entirely between her and the uniform owners. However, one or two stores prefer to deal with her direct and make a small margin on the deal. The best season for the little shop, of course, is just prior to opening of the baseball season, but there is always some work to be done on swimming suits, and both basketball and football create some business. Sweater emblems and letters contribute to year-round volume. With an investment of less than $100, Mrs. Jones earns on average of $100 per month the year round, with peak months going to about $150. She believes the idea would be good in any city where there is no such shop, or where there is no uniform factory which provides this service. Starting a food specialty business. While making bread one morning, it occurred to a widow in New England that the one thing she liked to do most of all was to bake, and she decided to give some thought to developing food specialty business in order to add to the family income. The next day she made arrangements with one of the local shops to handle her coffee cake and donuts and nut bread on a commission basis. She secured an order from the lunchroom near the station for a daily order of donuts, the first orders being put in on trial. A tea room which had a rather good business each day, and especially on Sunday, wanted rolls and pies as well as nut bread. These orders were, of course, not all placed in a day, but as he found a growing demand for her products and her confidence increased, she had the courage to solicit additional business. Out on the edge of town was a tourist camp which, like all such places, had little facilities for baking. One afternoon she sent her son out on his bicycle with his basket filled with donuts, cookies, pies and coffee cake. It was all sold without difficulty, and Johnny came home with orders for more. All summer long this proved to be a fertile market for her products. That fall and the winter following, she turned her hand to catering and developed a good business during the party season. Occasions such as the Hard Times party at the club and a big Halloween party also at the club called for dozens of donuts. She secured both orders simply because the committee responsible for the refreshments knew where to get the best donuts in town. That was the secret of her success. Everything did taste so good that people came back for more and more. She found that gingerbread was another favorite with the young people in town, and she made a specialty of it by adding a grand fudge sauce to be poured over the slices. After her business had developed, people got in the habit of calling her when unexpected company arrived, and she generally managed to provide something delicious that would fill in for a tea or a luncheon or a Sunday night supper. She remembered that bridge party hostesses liked to serve such dishes as creamed crab meat and creamed chicken in patty shells. As good patty shells were hard to obtain in their town, she added this item to her list and succeeded in working up a good demand for this specialty by recommending it for Sunday night suppers as well as bridge parties. Word-of-mouth advertising sold most of her products naturally, but the small cards enclosed with her bread, cakes, coffee cakes, and other items helped to advertise her business. These cards were about 3 by 6 and contained on the reverse side a number of suggestions for special treats for luncheon guests, bridge parties, Sunday night suppers and children's parties. Many a hostess turned these cards over in an emergency and found a happy solution to what to give the Joneses after bridge tonight. The cards were carefully typewritten by a friend of the family who was a typist. During the Christmas season, Easter, 4th of July, and other holidays, cards were mailed to customers containing 4 lists of foods which were especially suitable for parties. When large orders were received or when a catering order came in, it was, of course, necessary to secure extra help. Frequently this was a young woman who had just completed high school and, not having secured a position, was eager to make a little pin money. Her work was simple and consisted of such jobs as icing the little cakes, putting the icing or powdered sugar on the donuts, beating the eggs with the electric beater, putting the cakes or donuts in boxes, washing dishes and pans used in baking, and frequently delivering special orders when Johnny had too many to handle. The actual preparation of the various specialties was never turned over to anyone else. However, the special goodness of these products could not be entrusted to any assistant. For a woman without business experience, this unusual success might seem phenomenal. However, she succeeded because she put into her business what everyone has to put into business if he is to succeed: knowledge, hard work, ingenuity, and personality. Making money from worn-out tires. Among the unclaimed goods in Roy D. Potter's storage warehouse at Royal Oaks, Michigan, were a number of worn-out tires. He couldn't collect rental for their storage space, and he couldn't sell them for more than a few cents. So when he heard of a machine which made doormats out of the used tires, Potter decided to investigate. "I had a good many old tires on hand, and if I could make them up into mats, I thought I could get a little profit from them," explained Mr. Potter. He invested $300 in the mat-making machine and incidental equipment, made up a number of mats, stacked them in his warehouse, and then advertised them in the local newspapers. "I believed I would sell a number of mats from the advertisement," said Potter, "but didn't. There were no crowds clamoring for mats, and I was disappointed because only a few came to buy. I didn't sell enough to pay for the advertising. I reasoned this was because people did not know enough about the mats, and my problem was to get people acquainted with them. So I tried a window display. But it was hardly noticed. I tried calling from door to door, and sold a good many, but I couldn't down the feeling that there was a better market somewhere. Roy Potter kept thinking about this better market. He went around to office buildings and talked with managers. They used mats in the entrances of the buildings, they told him, and admitted his mat was better than the one they were using, but they were supplied. I walked my feet off for 2 weeks, continued Potter, before it occurred to me that I wasn't using the right kind of merchandising tactics. I changed them. Concentrating my calls upon business concerns, I adopted a policy of leaving a sample mat with each concern, to be used for a short period. I then pointed out that since the mats were made from old tires, each mat was much tougher and stronger than an ordinary mat, and built up a demonstration to prove the long life of the mats. One firm, manufacturing twist drills, wasn't impressed by this argument. The purchasing agent told me that if the workers operating surface grinders preferred my mat to the one being used, I'd get an order. He put my mat on the floor in front of a surface grinder. If the solution used in operating grinders gets on the bare floor, accidents are inevitable, so when my mat proved its ability to avoid such accidents, the workers wanted it. Before the day was up, the purchasing agent phoned and asked me to bring over 45 mats. That cleaned me out of mats and out of tires, too. I got another order for 130 feet of mat from a chain of grocery stores the next day, and had to scour around town to find old tires. Roy Potter pays 5 cents each for the old tires, and gets an average of 3 square feet of matting from each tire. He sells the mats at 70 cents a square foot. His total cost including production cost and overhead is 25 cents a square foot, giving him a net profit of 45 cents. With the present equipment he is able to turn out 300 square feet of matting daily. This operation for his first 2 months gave Potter a profit of more than $1,000. There is an unlimited field for mats made from old tires in most cities. Laundries, taverns, roadhouses, saloons, cemeteries, churches, office buildings, machine tool manufacturers, electric powerhouses, dry cleaning plants, stores, restaurants, printing plants, factories of all kinds, and every home, are prospects for sales. The mat making machine is small and operates on house electric current from an ordinary light bulb. It may be set up in your basement, or some mused room. The mats turned out are unusually durable, being woven together with heavy spring steel wire. Community marketing of handicrafts. One of the difficulties sometimes experienced by those who make things to sell is that they are more or less at the mercy of buyers when it comes to marketing their products. If there are several people in your community who make similar things, it may be possible to organize a community marketing agency, with one person acting as an agent for the products of all members. This, of course, has been done successfully in agricultural communities, and the idea is beginning to find favor among those who make things that are usually sold through such outlets as gift stores, department stores or wholesalers. A typical organization of this kind is the Willow Cottage Weavers, of Nantucket, Massachusetts. After several members of his group experienced difficulty in marketing their handicrafts, a central sales department was established, which devotes its entire attention to building up and maintaining a year-round market for the products of members. Deference to the style factor is most important in holding a clientele which must be persuaded to pay premium prices for quality products. Next to shortcomings in design, lack of conformity to color trends has been the most serious drawback for many a venture among arts and crafts groups. To overcome these serious obstacles, B. Mellandy, sales agent for the Willow Cottage Weavers, goes scouting several times a year to the style centers to study fashion trends, and more particularly, color preferences. As 95% of the output is original in design, it is most essential that the merchandise conform to apparel trends to hold customers, many of on sample. The direct sales campaign is two-pronged. On the one hand, there is the solicitation of old customers by mail. This has lately been coupled with a traveling exhibition which is counted upon to muster new prospects as well as to contact the old customers in the cities visited. Some of the producers of hand-woven textiles have simplified their display problem by staging demonstrations in department stores. The head of the Willow Cottage organization prefers an exhibition sale at a hotel, club, vacant store, or other location that permits an atmosphere of detachment. Invitations to hand-picked lists are relied upon to coax potential buyers. A second line of attack by the Willow Cottage Weavers is a distinct departure from the usual handicraft marketing methods. Several times a year, representatives of the 12 Loom plant visit leading cities to contact interior decorators and other volume purchasers of hangings, upholstery fabrics, etc. This plan has been richly productive of new business in sizable units. For example, a recent record-breaking order came in for fabrics for the new dormitory at Cornell. Because of the demand in modern upholstery and interior decoration for period designs, most of the work must be done to order to ensure color conformity. Master weaver Melody has found one secret of tying the steady customers which seems to have eluded most exploiters of handmade products. This trick is to fill the gap between orders of yardage for suits and coats with specialties such as scarves, neckwear, runners, mats, bureau and dresser sets, etc. In addition to creating many additional orders for the weavers, this activity cultivates gift sidelines that, in a sense, serve a sampling purpose in respect to weaves, patterns and color combinations. An architect for the birds. The name of Joseph H. Dodson is so well known that when you see it you immediately think of little wren houses swinging from trees or commodious apartment houses for martins placed in the most advantageous positions for their feathered guests. This flourishing business had its beginning years ago when Joseph Dodson worked for a Chicago bond house and much of his spare time was spent in the basement of his home making bird houses. These little bird houses were unique in that each one had a tiny piece of shiny metal tacked to the outside. He had discovered that many birds like to primp and preen themselves before mirrors and that by simply attaching this little piece of metal he could entice more birds to spend their summers with him. Before long his neighbors began to ask him to make bird houses for them. Then the friends of his neighbors sent in orders and soon he realized that there were commercial possibilities in this hobby. From this simple beginning a good business has developed and today, Joseph Dodson is still making bird houses and shipping them all over the country from the little town in Illinois where he lives. It is an idea that might appeal to you as one way to make that $1,000 we are talking about. There is a good market in nearly every community for deluxe bird houses and especially martin houses. They are easy to make and all you need to get started is a clever design and a few tools. Building a business on homemade fudge. Mrs. Bentley, who had a family of 4 children of school age, found herself faced with the necessity of adding to the family income. Near her home, in Chicago, was a district zone for light manufacturing. Girls who worked in these offices liked candy, she reasoned, the men did, too, for that matter. So she made up a quantity of fudge, wrapped it in cellophane, and made the rounds of the offices. She sold out her box of fudge before noon the first day and scheduled a return the next Tuesday to those offices she had called upon. That night she made another batch of fudge and the next morning called on the offices on the other side of the street with the same result. It wasn't long before she had built up a steady trade. She had divided the zone section into areas and devoted 1/2 a day to each area. In that way people in the offices in each area could plan on getting fudge if they wanted it on a certain day of the week. The girls, and men, arranged to leave their orders at the switchboard and it took but little time to fill them and be ready to go on to the next office. For special occasions, such as Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, parties, weekend trips, anniversaries, hostess gifts, etc., she packed fancy boxes of the fudge, alternating light and dark pieces to form a pattern. She booked orders ahead for these boxes and one of the children delivered them after school. She had arranged for 2 school stores and 1 bakery in the neighborhood to handle her candy and a tea room also gave her space for a small box of fudge which sold at a penny a slice. Through her cousin, who was the cashier in a large cafeteria in the neighborhood, she secured a good display of the candy on the counter near the cash register. Additional orders came from the teachers in the grade and high schools her children attended. These orders amounted to a nice little business, especially at Christmas time when many teachers went home for the holidays and wanted to add several boxes of candy to their Christmas gifts for the family. Another sales-making idea of Mrs. Bentley's was to put a card bearing the name Honey Fudge, her name and address, telephone number, and the price a pound, in each package. The boxes had to be inexpensive to keep costs down, so she chose plain, deep cream-colored boxes and with a hard brown crayon wrote the words Honey Fudge in a distinctive backhand script on the covers. A little practice was required, of course, to acquire the proper swing to the writing and she found that by placing the box cover on a block of smooth wood she could make a smart job of the handwriting. A little touch such as this in packaging your product often means the difference between success and failure. Where to sell candied popcorn. Standing in a crowd of 350 people who stopped to watch a Prairie baseball game, James Barlow, of Waterloo, Iowa, got an idea. Barlow wanted some popcorn and the nearest store was about 2 blocks away. Here were 100 or more people all wanting popcorn. What a chance for making money. So he decided to test the possibilities of his idea the following Sunday. He bought a corn popper and went to work. His wife's cookbook furnished a recipe for making caramel from corn syrup and water, and from that recipe Barlow made up a quantity of syrup which he poured over the corn. Then he pressed this caramelized popcorn into balls, wrapping each ball with red wax tissue. Just before the game began he filled a closed basket with popcorn balls and carried it into the crowd gathering to watch the game. Slowly moving up and down the sidelines, he soon sold all his popcorn at 5 cents a ball, and returned home 3 times during the game to refill the basket. His total sales were 179 popcorn balls. Expensive equipment is not necessary for successfully caramelizing popcorn. You may secure satisfactory results by pouring a thin caramel syrup over the corn shortly after it is popped, and letting it stand for a few minutes. Either corn syrup or molasses will make a good caramel when mixed with water and boiled. The syrup should be thin, however, so it will spread easily and dry quickly. Popcorn, always a fast-selling item, retains its freshness for 2 or 3 days, and sells readily wherever people gather to enjoy themselves, such as beaches, picnics, summer resorts, parks, and tourist camps. Opportunities for quick sales are sometimes found among the crowds who wait outside of public buildings, fairgrounds, and the theaters. Once you get the hang of making the popcorn, you can hire for a small commission a few live wire boys of high school age to help you do the selling, and the first thing you know you will have a thriving business. It means a little work to get started, but it is more than worth it. Ivory carving proves remunerative. Year ago, when Frank Foster of Atlanta, Georgia, was a boy, he learned to carve ivory. As he grew older, it became his hobby, and as the years went on, he became more and more expert. Like many skillful arts, ivory carving can be learned by almost any man or woman. It only requires patience and much practice to become expert. There are degrees of fineness in ivory carving just as in wood carving. Frank Foster turns out many different kinds of objects, from a plain billiard ball to the finest, most delicate bit of lacy carving. Since his retirement from business, Frank Foster has built up another business with his unusual hobby. Dominoes, billiard balls, beads, fancy boxes of all types, chessmen, bracelets, earrings, brooches, letter openers, bookends, small picture frames, quaint replicas of birds and small animals, figurines, and of course, elephants of various sizes, all are made by his skillful fingers. His chessmen are particularly beautiful. A fine set of 32 chessmen brings him from $50 to $75, a deluxe set as much as $250. Ivory is rather easy to work with because of its resiliency. The ivory used by Mr. Foster is elephant ivory. The tusks cost about $1,000 each, but he manages to buy scrap ivory around 1/10 the original cost. Piano factories have hundreds of pounds of material that are useless for making piano keys because the curve in the tusk makes it difficult to secure long pieces of ivory. Therefore, the amount from a tusk that can be used for keys is comparatively small. This scrap ivory is of excellent quality and can readily be used to form small objects. Potato chips made Hibbard independent. Roy C. Hibbard did not relish the long hours and uncertain income driving a taxi. He realized he was getting nowhere. So he kept his eyes open for some way to make extra money. He made many stops to pick up fares at beer taverns, and in this way became acquainted with the tavern owners. Sometimes they talked to him about their business in a general way. To make people drink more beer, he learned, salty food specialties, such as potato chips, were given free to tavern patrons. So Hibbard thought it would be a smart idea to supply taverns with potato chips. He obtained a machine that turned out a high-quality potato hip, and made up sample packages which he left with each tavern owner he knew. His first sampling produced a total of 50 trial orders. The quality of the chips was excellent, and the day following he was gratified to secure reorders totaling 75 pounds of chips. Hibbard quit his job driving a taxi to devote his entire me to his potato chip business. Hibbard's initial investment was about $100. He bought the machine on a deferred payment plan, paying $85 for it. Potatoes cost him 90 cents a 100 pounds, and grease for frying cost 14 cents a pound in 20-pound cans. By setting the machine up in the basement of the apartment building where he lived, he had no additional rent to pay. He made good money right from the start. His success was in the selection of the right kind of potatoes. At first he used a thin-skinned cobbler, which is inexpensive, but he later learned that all potatoes do not fry into good chips. The more expensive Idahos, recommended by the maker of the machine, were found to be much more satisfactory. Burbar figures the cost of frying potato chips at 9 cents a pound, and by bagging them in 5, 10 and 20-cent sized bags, he averages 50 cents a pound on retail sales. Sales in bulk to taverns bring him 30 cents a pound. He averages a net daily profit of better than $11, and his business is steadily growing. A potato chip machine similar to Hibbard's can be set up in your own home. It is operated from gas, and fries potato chips of uniform quality. Ready outlets are found in taverns, lunchrooms and restaurants, and you may wholesale them at 15 cents a pound to grocery and delicatessen stores. When put up in bags, such as the 5-cent bags, an additional charge should be added. Doll Hospital pays for operation. Molly Winder, the wife of a textile salesman, had been in an automobile accident which had injured her right foot. An operation would cost around $800. How could she get that much money? Of course, there was her husband's salary, but payments on a home, insurance premiums and living expenses, pretty well used all of that. So Mrs. Winder decided to make doll clothes. She had often dressed dolls at Christmas time for her friends' children from the textile samples discontinued by her husband from his line. She found her friends quite willing to buy the doll clothes for their children's birthdays and as gifts. Her doll clothes sold quickly because she patterned them after the current styles in women's and children's clothes. A doll dressed in the current fashion always makes a hit with children. She had started to make the doll clothes in September, and in November and December she concentrated on getting as much business as possible for the Christmas season. It was at this time that she found herself not only dressing dolls for Christmas, but also mending them. The dolls brought in by the mothers would have a broken arm or leg, a scratch on the face, a cracked head or a badly torn wig. Of course, these damages would have to be repaired before the doll could be dressed. It was easy for her to make these simple repairs. A little glue here, a bit of sewing there, the wig recurled and the new clothes would make Betsy Ann or Sally Lou look brand new again. Molly Winder is the genial type of woman who has a large circle of friends and acquaintances, and almost before she realized it, the word had gone around and she was in the doll hospital business. However, she did not stop at repairing dolls. Toys of all kinds were brought to her to mend, and even china and little pieces of bric-a-brac. She also found, perhaps cultivated would be a better word, a market for character dolls and dolls dressed in the costumes of the various nations. These dolls were raffled at church bazaars and charity affairs held by societies, lodges, etc. By the following June, Molly was able to make arrangements for her operation. She had enough money to pay the hospital bill and more than half of the doctor bill. Now that she had built up a good list of customers, the second Christmas was so profitable the work required all her time, and she delegated the household activities to her eldest daughter of high school age. Mrs. Winder was fortunate, of course, in that she had most of the materials needed in her work and but little money had to be spent for supplies, but even so there is good money and lots of fun in operating a community hospital for dolls. Brown bread and beans pay the taxes. The woman who lives in or near a section of apartment dwellers will generally find a market near her home for breads, cookies, cakes and similar products if she but searches her neighborhood for prospects. One woman living on Chicago's South Side developed a market for brown bread and baked beans by calling on homes in her neighborhood on Friday afternoons. Many homes that serve baked beans, creamed codfish and similar Friday foods, find that brown bread is just the needed item to make a perfect meal. However, most women will not bother to make brown bread, and it is one of those special foods that the commercial food firms have not been able to reproduce with all its fine flavor. She started out with the idea of selling brown bread only, but the tie-up with baked beans was so obvious, it was not long before she was selling both. Her method of introducing the brown bread was to carry a small case similar to a typewriter case containing several whole loaves of brown bread and one sliced loaf. The slices, which had been cut in half, were offered to each prospective customer as a sample. The bread was exceptionally good, as the sample proved, and before long she had several Friday customers. The baked beans were deliciously brown and put up in brown earthenware of two sizes, small and large, depending upon the size of the family ordering. Most of the women welcomed the idea of a home-cooked meal without any of the fuss of preparation. They could arrive home from their bridge parties, put the pot of beans in the oven to warm, slice the bread, fix up a substantial salad, bring out the pickles and catsup and serve the dessert prepared in the morning before leaving for the party. Being a wide-awake person, this woman made up a list of foods with which brown bread tasted good, such as baked beans, codfish, potato salad, Finnan Haddie, etc. She also suggested it for the children's lunches with a big glass of milk, as well as sliced, cut in circles or other fancy shapes, and spread with cheese, to serve at luncheons and parties. Her name, address and telephone number were typed by her daughter in high school on regular recipe-size cards, and a list of the ways of using brown bread was typed on the back of the card together with prices. These cards were mailed to friends of customers, names she secured by simply asking for them, given to prospects who had shown an interest in her products, and to customers. She also mailed them to tenants in the buildings where she had customers. Incidentally, she never missed an opportunity to call on other tenants in a building where a customer lived. In addition to this type of business, she opened up another field for her brown bread by calling upon the 3 hotels in the immediate vicinity, as well as selling 4 other hotels in an adjacent neighborhood that catered to more or less permanent guests who were fussy about their food. Her high school daughter and 12-year-old son delivered the orders near home, while she herself drove the old family car and delivered the hotel orders and other orders outside her immediate neighborhood. As the business grew, she began to put aside a tidy little sum of money which paid the taxes on her home each year and helped to dress the children as well as herself. He made snakes popular. Several years ago, George K. End, of Arcadia, Florida, helped his 2 small sons kill a rattlesnake and skin it. The reptile's flesh, which was a pale, salmon pink, looked inviting, and Mr. N decided to taste it as an experiment. To his surprise, he found that it had a delicate flavor and was exceedingly tender. Sometime later, he served the meat at a convention at Tampa, and those who tried it agreed that it was delicious. A number of friends also tried it on his recommendation and pronounced it a real delicacy. He decided that there might be a market for the product, and as the immediate vicinity has more rattlesnakes to the square mile than any other part of the United States, he had an unlimited meat supply for his odd business. He established a canning plant and started to prepare and market his product. The main difficulty, of course, was overcoming the prejudice people have about eating snakes. However, Mr. N found enough people who considered his product a delicacy to enable him to build up a good-sized business. People eat eels, snails, and frog legs, so why not clean, palatable snake meat, a product much cleaner than the oyster which so many people enjoy. The snakes are captured alive by means of a noose at the end of a bamboo pole about 6 feet long, then they are swung into a wire cage and taken to the cannery. Here they are killed the same day if possible, as they will not eat in captivity and consequently lose considerable weight. The snake catchers are paid at the rate of 20 cents a foot, averaging about $1.25 a snake. The meat is prepared with or without a sauce, and orders for raw rattlesnake meat are also filled. The average snake weighs about 9 pounds when brought in, but much of this weight is lost through shrinkage in cooking and with the removal of the head, bones and rattles. Not cheap by any means, the meat sells for $1.25 for a 4 1/2 ounce can, the uncooked meat bringing $2.50 a pound. The meat is also smoked in the same fashion ham is smoked and marketed as snakes in small bags. In view of the fact that the meat has a very delicate flavor, it is especially delicious served as canapés. Other parts of the rattler, such as the head, the rattles, the fangs, are made up into ornaments, and a rubbing oil is made from the fatty tissues. The skin, of course, is made into hat bands, belts, pocketbooks, book covers, etc. You may not be keen about the idea of starting a snake cannery, even though you live in a snake-infested area. However, the way Mr. N made his $1,000 may suggest to you the many opportunities for making money that exist right in your own backyard, so to speak, if only you look for them. What you can make from clamshells. Mary Cooper, who lived with her 2 small children in a cheap rooming house, had lost her job. However, being an ingenious person, she had soon established herself in a nice little business of her own, making novelties from clam and oyster shells. She secured the shells without cost from a nearby seafood shop and made them up into novelties. She took them down to the beauty parlor where she had been working, and the owner of the shop gave her display space and a window for a commission on all that were sold. Such novelties are inexpensive to make. The materials used consist of common pipe cleaners, clam, oyster shells, and other shells. No particular skill is required. Here is how to do it. Drill a hole in the small end of an oyster shell. Insert one end of a pipe cleaner through this hole and fasten it securely by twisting the wire over and around the edge of the shell, letting most of the pipe cleaner extend upward. Now repeat this operation with a second oyster shell of the same size. Place the 2 shells alongside each other. Halfway up the length of the pipe cleaners, bend and twist them together for the rest of their length. Next, select 2 small oyster shells. Match and fit them together about the twisted single portion of the pipe cleaners. That portion of the pipe cleaners which protrudes above the shells becomes a neck. Now drill a hole in one side of a small conical shell. Attach this to the top of the pipe cleaner. You now have the figure of a comical man, with 2 large feet made from oyster shells, a body made from oyster shells, and the legs and neck from the pipe cleaners. The small shell on top, of course, is the head. Arms may be added by cutting a pipe cleaner in half, and attaching to the neck at the juncture of the oyster shells. A small brush and 10 cents worth of paint will enable you to tint your figures any color. Ashtrays and a score of useful items may be easily made in this way. Tosdale sisters saw Paris on fancy pillows. The Tosdale sisters had just finished college, and after the usual round of parties had been given for them in their hometown, they developed a bad case of wanderlust. Somehow or other Helen and Mary Tosdale meant to make some money for a trip. There was one thing in which both girls excelled, and that was sewing. Both of them had made all their dresses and many of their suits and coats since their high school days. They knew colors and fabrics, and they had style sense. However, neither one of the girls had any desire to develop a dressmaking trade. It would have to be some other type of sewing, they decided. And then they hit on the idea of fancy pillows. The years of sewing in the Tosdale home had resulted in trunks and boxes of both used and unused fabrics and ribbons and edgings. After a checkup, they found they would have enough for quite a number of pillows before they would have to buy any new material. That summer they worked over pillow designs, and by November, they had made several dozen unusual and beautiful pillows. Ribbons in matching tones were woven together to make interesting squares. Bands of contrasting material were appliqued in modern effects. Porch pillows were made of sturdy chintz and cretonne, their edges bound in contrasting colors. Fine linens were daintily embroidered to fashion baby pillows of softest down. Scraps of lace and silks were used to make boudoir pillows, and jewel-colored squares of velvet and satin were trimmed with looped fringe edgings or with pipings of a contrasting material to make plain, tailored cushions. 3 weeks before Christmas they were ready to display their work. They persuaded a local laundry agent to rent them as window space for the 3 weeks for $5. After the made Christmas rush was over, they found that they had sold every pillow they had made up and had orders for about 2 dozen more to fill. They charged good prices, too. As a matter of fact, they discovered that people seemed to appreciate handwork in direct proportion to the price. While a handsome profit was made on the Christmas sale, there wasn't enough money in the travel fund to take them both to Europe that year. So they designed, and planned, and sewed all spring and summer. The magazines were scanned for ideas, and the silk sales eagerly watched for bargains. They managed to buy a lot of kapok and down-filled pillows in muslin covers from a wholesaler at a price cheaper than they could make them. During the spring, the two girls had orders from a half-dozen local families for pillows and drapes, and they sold pillows steadily through the summer for porch use. One of the local gift shops gave them an order for pillows which the proprietor admitted were more attractive and better styled than any she could purchase elsewhere. Late that fall they worked busily to get enough stock ready for the Christmas sale. They figured that even if they made too many, they could be sold during the next year. By the time the Christmas season arrived they had more pillows than the laundry agent's window could hold. So a vacant store on a busy street was secured for a month, and it was so attractively arranged that people came in just to look around. The majority of them, however, evidently left with pillows under their arms, because when two tired girls figured up their sales after the last mad scramble Christmas Eve, they found only 2 pillows left, one of which had been stepped on and soiled and the other wedged behind a counter out of sight. So the Tosdale sisters saw Europe the next year, and evidently it won't be their last trip, for they have decided to open up a shop. Now that they have an idea of what people want, their shop will carry pillows, curtains, quilts, padded throws for the chaise lounge, pads for dresser drawers and shelves, padded dress hangers, equipment for wardrobes and closets, etc. To have enough stock on hand, they have secured the part-time services of 2 women who do exquisite needlework. Makes miniature reproductions of antiques. Visiting George Kona's shop in San Francisco is like traveling with Gulliver through the land of Lilliput. Time and space are eliminated by this craftsman's wand as he fashions miniature models of antique furniture. In orderly rows above his workbench, hang diminutive planes and saws, and tiny little hammers that drive still tinier nails into bits of wood of match-like thickness. With these tools Mr. Kona fashions high boys as high as an orange and low boys no higher than a walnut. Every detail is finished with minute precision, even to the lining of the drawers, for no cabinet maker ever delved more intensively into furniture lore or applied his knowledge with closer attention to authenticity. As a boy in England, Mr. Kona studied period furniture and cultivated his talent for reproducing it. Later, in California, when his health failed after many years in the ministry, he turned to cabinet making for a livelihood. There were fat years during which he became notable in San Francisco for antique furniture reproductions so clever that only an expert could tell the copy from the original. Then came 1929 and lean years. He was past 70, yet his agile fingers still held their cleverness. When business languished he turned to his hobby, the modeling in miniature of Chippendale chairs, Duncan Fife tables and Hepplewhite sideboards. Of course, this does not mean doll furniture. These bits of furniture are real miniatures. To give a cash basis of differentiation, a Kona bedroom set sells for $25, a doll's set of similar for 25 cents. Former patrons straggling in with odd jobs noticed the exquisite little models and bought them. They sent friends who wanted a set just like it. Gradually a little furniture business filled the big furniture void. One day a woman with a pre-depression bank balance asked Mr. Kona if he could build a dollhouse to fit the furniture. The answer was yes, Mr. Kona having studied architecture along with antiques in England. He drew plans and built a house that clicked and brought more orders. Now he makes to-order houses that, as he puts it, are just a little better. These range from a $10 cottage for a real estate firm to a $300 mansion for a wealthy client's child. Just now he is working on a house complete with furniture that will bring $350. The house stands in his window and the furniture is being added piece by piece as finished. Every day interested observers pause before the shop window to ascertain the progress made. The 5-room colonial house is white with green trimmings. It has parquetry floors of oak and mahogany and a delightful oak staircase, with banisters, that leads to the bath and bedrooms above. The rooms contain electric switches of postage stamp size and the chandeliers are fitted with tiny globes. The finely wrought window frames enclose real glass windows instead of the usual mica. The interest in miniature reproductions of antique furniture during the past few years has been largely stimulated by the exhibit of Mrs. Ward Thorne's exquisite miniature rooms at the World's Fair, and by the $500,000 dollhouse being exhibited for charity by the moving picture actress, Colleen Moore. Another beautiful example of this work is the priceless collection of Helena Rubinstein, the well-known cosmetic manufacturer. Some of the tiny little furnishings of these rooms have been acquired by their owners during years of collecting little objects of glass, brass, wood, and bits of furniture. However, most of them have been made by modern craftsmen. Many a man with a workbench in his basement and a flair for design can turn out these tiny bits of furniture. Books and periodicals on furniture design will help him in getting the lines of the tiny pieces of furniture as authentic as the originals. A rattling good income from rattlers. Catherine C. Reedy, of Tucson, Arizona, became interested in snakes while homesteading 23 miles from the town where Mr. Reedy worked. She began studying the local wildlife and vegetation as a pastime and became so interested that she started to write on nature subjects. This meant getting together more or less of a reference library, cameras and other equipment. Then the Depression came along and slashed the family income rather badly. She wrote a few letters and found herself engaged to collect bugs for several biological supply houses. She also sold cactus and wildflower seed. It was while collecting notes on native foods of the Indians that she found the Indians not only used the meat of the rattlers for food, but they made ornamental necklaces from the bones. This aroused her curiosity, and the next time she captured a rattler, she popped him into a kettle, and the next day she had a business. The ornaments include costume jewelry, buttons, buckles, necklaces and bracelets. The bones, explains Mrs. Reedy, resemble carved ivory, and achieve a startling whiteness after a lengthy cleansing and bleaching process. They are then matched carefully and strung in various ways, some naturally and some in combination with colored beads of many kinds and sizes. The rattler's skins make lovely billfolds, bookmarks, cigarette cases, checkbook holders, pocketbooks and even boots and jackets. During the World's Fair, a tailored suit of rattlesnake skins made by Mrs. Reedy was displayed in the Arizona exhibit, and attracted a tremendous amount of attention. Business became so good, the Reedys moved back to town and fitted up a studio where their handicraft could be displayed more easily. She now has several hunters to secure the snakes and has put in a stock of meat. She has found that there is always a small demand for the skulls and fangs and the rattles. In addition to maintaining the studio, Mrs. Reedy often exhibits her wares at the tourist camps and dude ranches in the West. He specialized in hamburgers. A few years ago, Henry Fisher lost his job in a restaurant. He took $50 from his small savings account, rented space in a Chicago Loop office building, and opened up a hamburger shop. In 3 months, Henry's business became so profitable, he opened 2 more shops, which he now operates successfully. The space secured for my first location was hardly big enough to turn around in, he said. I hope to be able to get additional space later, add a regular line of restaurant food, and serve coffee, tea and milk. But I decided against this policy during my first week and specialized in hamburger sandwiches. These were a little larger than ordinary, and I sold them for a dime. People working in the building crowded around at noon, and it was at once apparent that they wanted quick service more than anything else. As news of my stand got around the building, I had difficulty keeping up with the crowd's demand during the noon-hour rush. My investment in equipment amounted to $16. Rent for the 6 by 10 foot space was $33 a month. I did no advertising. I hadn't figured on it, for I hadn't planned on staying in that small space very long. As I was serving a better hamburger sandwich for a dime, one covered with relish in which a little mayonnaise dressing was mixed on a rye bun, sometimes known as Vienna style, they sold themselves. On my first day, I took in $24. My expenses ran to $15. The second day was a little better, and by the end of the week, I figured I was on my way. My wife, who was as excited over the success of this first stand as I was, urged me not to be satisfied with one location, but to open a second stand. However, we had difficulty finding a spot for it, since few office buildings had suitable space available and those having such space wanted too much for it. So we chose a small room on the second floor of an industrial building which was almost entirely devoted to the printing industry. One typesetting company employed 120 men, and a printing company occupying 2 floors employed 600 men and girls. Our success in this spot was immediate. The workers patronized us because we were convenient and gave them a satisfying sandwich for a dime, which was about all many wanted to pay for a lunch. Those who didn't want to leave their shop or office often asked someone to bring back a hamburger. Office and errand boys from the offices in the building take back as many as 15 or 20 hamburgers for the girls and men in their office at one time. I could have sold coffee at our first location, but that would have meant a delay in service. People who want coffee generally want to sit down at a table, and I didn't have room for tables there. Those who bought the hamburgers didn't seem to mind not having coffee. So I saved the rental on larger space and the cost of fixtures, and did just as big a business as if I had them. In the second shop, however, we sold coffee, because it seemed to be a custom for working men to send out a boy for enough coffee for 8 or 10 at one time. Our profits in this building were almost as large as in the first place. When I decided to open the third location, I chose a spot in another industrial building. Here rent was cheap, and there was a large and highly concentrated market for coffee and hamburgers. Henry pointed out that he did not consider locations outside of the business or industrial districts as suitable for hamburger stands. His success, he declares, was due to offering a convenience to working people with limited time. If he can get 80% of the workers in a building, he is able to keep one stand going in great shape, and have the evening for himself. His equipment was one second-hand griddle, 30 by 18 inches, for frying the hamburgers, a large tin box where he keeps his supply of giant rolls, and a large bottle of relish. A trick in making hamburgers particularly delicious is to mix the meat with crumbled stale bread. No ice is required since the hamburgers come ready for the griddle on 2 daily deliveries from the local packing house warehouses. A stand of this kind may be opened with very small capital in any small space on the lower floors, not necessarily the lobby or street floor, of an industrial or office building. Potato chips bagged, small pies, and similar specialties might profitably be carried as sidelines. Etched bottles and boxes sell easily. When Harry Brown finished college, he decided to see if he could make some money with an idea he had been mulling over for some time. In his chemistry course in college, he had learned how to etch glass by coating it with beeswax, lettering words with a steel point, and then exposing the surface of the glass to the fumes of hydrofluoric acid. With a little practice, Harry found that he could produce some rather neat-looking bottles suitable for the medicine cabinet. He purchased a carton of standard-sized bottles of good clear glass and etched them with the names of the usual medicine cabinet remedies such as boric acid, witch hazel, hand lotion, glycerin, etc. He made up several sets of 4 bottles each and sold them to friends and relatives. Later he sold them from house to house. On every call he tried to sell a complete set of bottles. However, when it was plainly evident that the housewife did not need the entire set, he would suggest her taking a pair of the bottles. Sometimes he could get her to suggest other labels for 2 more which he would etch for no additional charge. He also took orders for special sets of bottles for the invalid in the family or for the baby's medicines. Harry made it a point to deliver the orders in the evening. Generally, the man of the house would be home and there would be no delay in getting the money for his work. Furthermore, he frequently found that father would be interested in securing for his private supply a uniform set of bottles with names such as rye, bourbon, scotch, etc. Another idea that sold well was a little mirrored top matchbox. He bought these by the dozen and etched numbers from 1 to 8 on the mirrored tops. Women bridge fans were delighted with them as they could use them for bridge prizes. Many of them bought the boxes on site because they wanted to be the first in their crowd to use them at a bridge party. When these went over so big, he purchased some larger mirrored cigarette boxes and etched the names of the popular cigarette brands on the tops. Women bought these novelties for bridge prizes also as well as for their own homes. Around Christmas he did an excellent business in mirrored boxes. Before long, Harry found himself so busy that he not only had to secure assistance in handling the work of etching the bottles, but he also had to hire someone to follow up the inquiries he received. The vogue for wrought iron house numbers. When the Depression took away his office job, Leander Hvail of Deerfield, Illinois, turned to his hobby, the making of hand-wrought knickknacks for homes. Word-of-mouth advertising along the fashionable North Shore section has brought Mr. Hvail many orders for handmade iron home markers, swinging signs at the gate or on posts near the entrance, wall plaques, weather vanes and other handicraft. His son, a Chicago Art Institute graduate, makes the designs. One home marker, which he worked out for a dog shelter, an enterprise of one of Chicago's society leaders, shows a little dog up on his hind legs, begging. 2 other little dogs are sympathetically listening. Another design was a lovely Madonna for the wall of an outdoor living room of a North Shore estate. The home marker had its origin in the Middle Ages before the invention of house numbers. In order to identify one's home, it was customary to use some sort of distinctive sign. Thus people came to speak of Mr. So-and-so who lived at the sign of the Green Rooster or the Yellow Lantern. Among the nobility, the crests from the family coat of arms were used as home markers. Fighting cocks, spread eagles and unicorns were popular. The modern vogue of naming homes has brought with it the demand for markers to symbolize hospitality and good fellowship. Mr. Hvail realized that he would have to let people know what he could do with wrought iron if he were to have any kind of success. So, although he had no money to spare, He planned to have an exhibit at the Garden Club flower show held at the Navy Pier. The money for the display space was earned by doing odd chores and shoveling peat for a month for the club. The display did bring his work to the attention of those who appreciate the beauty of wrought iron and created no little business. There are any number of things to be made of wrought iron, and those who have a hankering for this type of work will find innumerable designs in books on the subject. The wrought iron gates and balconies of New Orleans, made in the colonial days, are known all over the world for their beauty. For years these examples of art and skill have endured. The intricate, lacy designs are really the work of artists and are not easy to equal. However, there are many simpler designs which can be made by the average craftsman. Home markers, colonial lanterns for entrance lights, railings, small balconies beneath windows, fireplace equipment, grills, hinges, door knockers, all are in vogue today due to the revival of interest in colonial architecture and furnishings. Prices charged for wrought iron things should, of course, be high enough to put a proper value on original design and expert craftsmanship of this sort. James Mack's Sandwich Bar. 4 years ago, James Mack, in search of a better climate for his health, drove to Florida and stopped for a while in Miami. Now James Mack was a connoisseur of good coffee. He was fussy about the kind of coffee he drank, and well he might be, for he made a good cup of coffee himself. According to Mack, there was no good coffee in Miami. He tried all the restaurants, the hotels, and even the refreshment stands. The coffee was terrible. Well, if he couldn't get a good cup of coffee in Miami, he would make it himself and show these Florida cooks how the people from up north like their coffee. No sooner said than done, James Mack opened up a sandwich bar. The menu included only 2 types of sandwiches, fish and hamburger, and the best coffee you could buy at any price. Yet he charged only a nickel a cup for it. Milk was added to the menu as a concession to those who couldn't drink coffee. The kind of fish used in the sandwiches was always whatever was in the market that morning in quantities sufficient to be purchased at a good price. The hamburger was always strictly fresh and prepared so that it really was good enough to accompany the best cup of coffee in town. No pie, no cake, no cookies, no ham and eggs, nothing but the sandwiches and coffee and milk were served. People were skeptical at first, but the few who tried his coffee were soon back with other customers. It became the habit to brag to newcomers, "I'll take you over to Mack's where you will get the best cup of coffee you ever tasted." There were seats for only 12 at Mack's place and he refused to enlarge. "I don't want a great big place with lots of overhead," he remarked to a visitor who asked him why he didn't enlarge the place. "The customers really like it this way, it's cozy and different from the average restaurant or hotel dining room. If I enlarged and had to have waitresses and tables, the place would look like every other food emporium." People did like it as it was. They stood 4 deep in line to get their coffee, and thought it fun. They ate their dinners at the hotels and came over to Mack's for their coffee. It became a fad and he was wise enough to know it and to keep it so. Once he had made his reputation for having the best coffee in town, he did nothing to change it. That coffee had to be good. He bought the berries himself, blended them, and ground the coffee fresh each time it was prepared. The few things he served were all fresh and good quality. The place was immaculate and so was Mack and his assistant in their white coats. There was no noisy clatter of dishes and silverware, the service was quiet, the place cool and shaded from the sun by awnings. Mack was proud of his coffee and sandwiches. He expected you to enjoy them, and you did. Today, Mack's place is an institution. He has turned in his old car on a new one, paid his doctor bills back up north, improved his place, paid for all his equipment, and has money in the bank. Donuts bring profits. Upon leaving his job in the circulation department of a Chicago newspaper, S.D. Lavely retired to Watervliet, Michigan. Idleness soon palled on him, and he decided to start a small business of his own. He rented a store and invested $250 in equipment for making greaseless donuts. The first batch of donuts baked was given away as samples to people passing the store. That first day Lavely sold 70 dozen donuts at 25 cents a dozen. The second day went even better as a majority of those who bought the first day repeated, and brought others with them. Before the first week passed, Lavely had reached an average daily sale of over 150 dozen, all he could bake. He expanded his business and added more equipment. As Watervliet is but a short drive from Paw Paw Lake, Lavely figured he could do a brisk business with the summer resorts around Paw Paw. So he hired a woman to help his wife bake donuts while he packed 60 dozen in his car and drove down to the lake. Within 2 hours he sold the entire lot to vacationists in cottages. After that he drove down to the lake at least once every day. Later, he established a regular route to the nearby towns of Marcellus, Lawrence, and Hartford, where he sold the donuts at wholesale for 15 cents a dozen to most of the restaurants, retail stores, tea rooms, soda fountains and lunchrooms. The cost of baking greaseless donuts averages under 6 cents a dozen with the equipment Lavely used. His small machine bakes 8 dozen in an hour, or 80 dozen in a 10-hour day. Lavely started with 2 of these machines, giving him a daily output of 160 dozen donuts. During the first week, his sales totaled 900 dozen at 25 cents a dozen. When he had deducted all his expenses, he found that he had made quite a nice little profit, about $161. Greaseless donuts are baked in electrically operated bakers. They are not fried like ordinary donuts. The donut batter used is exactly the same as is used when baking the greasy donut. When packed in waxed paper containers, greaseless donuts remain fresh for 6 to 8 days. This type of donut is quite easily digested and may be eaten without harm even by chronic stomach sufferers. Equipment for baking greaseless donuts may be set up in your own kitchen and operated from a light socket. Demand for this product is always good, and stores, lunchrooms, and restaurants are excellent outlets. You may retail some to your friends and neighbors, as Lavely did, and before you know it you will have a thriving business of your own, with unlimited possibilities for extending and enlarging it. It has the great advantage of being a business where satisfied customers draw others. The average American takes to donuts like a duck takes to the water, and it does not take the people in town long to make a beaten path to the door of the man who can make better donuts. A work corner in the basement or garage solves the problem of what to do with your spare time, and can be made to add materially to the family income. Lower picture shows some of the things made in the shop above. Motor-driven chairs for invalids. Lucerne Custer, of Dayton, Ohio, makes motor-driven chairs for people who are incapacitated, invalids or cripples. His plant, in Dayton, turns out about 3 chairs a week, at an average price of $200 a chair. Until recently, all the chairs were driven by electric batteries. Now, however, some of them have gasoline motors and will run along at 15 miles an hour. Some of these chairs have built-in showcases to enable their users to sell candy or notions. One Southerner had a chair built to carry himself and his Negro attendant. Many of the cripples for whom he makes chairs like gay colors, so he paints their chairs fire engine red and equips them with powerful headlights and loud horns. 20 years ago Mr. Custer started to make chairs for boardwalks. Putting motors in them revolutionized the business for him and he made good money for several years. Then he saw a market for motor-driven chairs for invalids and the incapacitated. It wasn't long before most of his business was catering to this market. 100 other things easy to make. Wood. Start with the simpler things such as bookends, a bookstand, bird houses, garden trellises, picture frames, rack for garden tools, window boxes, footstools, flower stands. When you have developed some skill and ease in handling tools, try folding screens, end tables, cupboards, hanging bookshelves, coffee tables, toys, etc. The modern style of furniture is simple and easy to make. Keep clear of elaborate ornamentation which does not add to the design of the product. There is also a good demand for the rustic type of lawn and garden furniture. This furniture is made of small logs and branches upon which the bark is left. The construction is simple in the extreme. Blueprints can be had from such magazines as Popular Science Monthly New York, and from the government. Cement. It requires much less skill to make things of cement than of wood. Forms of wood or metal may be bought or you can make them yourself. There are government bulletins explaining how to mix and use the cement. The cement companies will also send you instructions. Get a catalog from some company making this type of product and see just what items are in demand. Bird baths, sundials, aquariums, benches, urns or large jardinières, and other garden and lawn equipment are popular. When you have acquired some skill, you can also make clever little figures and ornaments such as frogs and mermaids for the lily pond, rabbits and squirrels for the lawn, fawns, birds, etc. Paper. So many things can be made with paper it is almost impossible to enumerate them. With pastepot and shears, or shears alone, clever hands can fashion an endless number of things that can be sold in the gift shops, in your own shop, from door to door, or at fairs and exhibits. One of the most interesting things to do with paper is to make silhouettes. There are books on silhouette making and many magazine articles have covered this art. With practice and a certain dexterity, you can make a good living with this work. The usual practice is to set up your work table in a gift shop, a department store, a greeting card shop, a county fair, a street fair, or any place where many people congregate. The silhouettes are sold at from 50 cents to $1 each. Double your paper and cut 2 of them at once. Then offer them to the customer at 2 for 75 cents or 2 for $1.25, depending upon your price per silhouette. A little showmanship will add to your sales. With wallpaper you can create some beautiful folding screens. Look over those on display in your local department store. You can also make closet accessories from boxes and wallpaper, hat boxes, blanket boxes, shoe boxes, etc. These should be matched, or ensembled. With wallpaper you can also make scrapbook covers, cover waste paper baskets, tin cookie boxes, cigarette boxes, etc. These should be shellacked when finished to protect the paper. Many decorators have had unusual success with cutting designs from wallpaper and making an applique border for bathroom, kitchen or bedroom walls. These borders can also be used to decorate kitchen cabinets, bread boxes and other containers, valances for windows, etc. Colored cutouts of animals, fairy tale characters, fruit, flowers, etc. can be made for children's rooms, as wall or furniture decorations. Make these in sets, put them in glassine envelopes and sell them for 50 cents and up a set. With crepe paper you can make fascinating favors and decorations for parties. See the Dennis & Company's party books for suggestions. Oilcloth. Oilcloth may be used in much the same way as wallpaper. It is excellent to cover folding screens, especially for kitchen or nursery use, to cover boxes, to cover scrapbooks and school books, as cutouts for wall and cupboard decorations, for valances, etc. In addition, oilcloth makes attractive breakfast and luncheon sets for the summer cottage, table mats for children's use, porch cushions, kitchen aprons, beach bags, table runners for the porch, baby's bibs, laundry bags, as coverings for kitchen articles, the scouring powder can, matchbox, etc., racks for pot holders, waste basket, etc. Wool, yarn. At present, with the craze for knitted things, there is an opportunity to sell knitted garments for babies and adults. Knitted suits and dresses sold through the department stores start at around $50. The vogue for colonial furniture in the last few years has brought a demand for hooked rugs which are in keeping with colonial interiors. These rugs are also suitable for summer cottages. One young woman who made several rugs for herself, not only achieved considerable skill in making the rugs, but speed as well, and could make the small type of bedroom rug in her spare time in a few days. Through her friends, the local gift shop, and an advertisement in the neighborhood paper, she secured orders which netted her enough profit to pay half her household expenses. Her rugs sold because they were well made and were of unusual designs. Modern designs can be hooked as well as the colonial type. Knitted garments for babies, needlepoint chair seats or footstool covers, all suggest ways of making money. Skill in this type of work always comes with practice. Textiles, aprons and house dresses offer a fertile field for a woman's clever hands. Many a small business has been built up by someone who started making aprons and selling them to her neighbors. Nellie Donnelly is today one of the most successful makers of women's dresses and aprons in the U.S. She started this business in a little workroom in the attic of her Kansas City home. Most manufacturers thought then that women would not pay more than 69 or 79 cents for wash frocks to wear about the house. Nellie Donnelly knew better and proved it by building a success with $1 wash dresses. Many women have found that men like their shirts made to order and will pay a little more for a well-tailored garment. Handmade handkerchiefs for men and women, curtains and draperies, slipcovers for furniture, hand-quilted comfortables and throws, smocks, shoe and dress bags, infants and children's garments, fancy costumes for parties and school plays, collar and cuff sets, are other suggestions. The secret of success in this field is not to try to compete with cheap merchandise now on the market. People are willing to pay a price for handmade things. Make your dresses, aprons, shirts, and other things of excellent material and good workmanship and put a good price on them. Metal. There is a vogue just now for articles made of tin. Almost any type of tin can be used to make such things as candlesticks, bookends, vases, boxes, sconces, and toys for children. All that is needed in the way of equipment is a workbench, a pair of leather gloves, pair of heavy shears, block of wood, a wooden mallet, a pair of dividers, a half-round file, a vise, and a soldering outfit. The finished product should be given 2 coats of paint. Complete directions can be secured from Leisure, 683 Atlantic Avenue, Boston, Massachusetts. Some of the other metals such as embossed copper, brass, pewter, require more skill in handling. Tin may also be embossed. Hand-wrought iron equipment for fireplaces, home markers, swinging sign at the gate, foot scrapers, lanterns for colonial doorways, and other such items are in demand today, due, no doubt, to the revival of interest in the colonial mode of decoration. Lighting fixtures of wood and copper or wrought iron and wood are simple to make. A woman inventor, of Chicago, is grossing $6,000 a month, making hair curlers out of lipstick containers. Sheet metal is another material which can be handled dexterously by the amateur craftsman. This material makes up into good-looking stands, baskets, racks, shelves, fire screens, bird cages, lawn ornaments, stools, tables, lamp bases, bookends, cigarette boxes, ashtrays, toys, novelties, and innumerable other things. Until recently, this work meant tedious hours with soldering irons and other hand tools. Now, however, with the new sheet metal working outfit on the market, the home craftsman can use the same methods as the modern factory does. With this equipment, a simple piece like a metal waste basket can be completed in less than half an hour, and the total cost, including the paint, is less than 20 cents. The makers of the metal working equipment furnish books of designs and patterns as well as the necessary materials. Other materials, parchment lamp shades, particularly shades for wall lights, are always in good taste. The parchment may be purchased in the stores, and many department stores have trained women on their staffs who will help you with designs. Handmade baskets, pottery, beadwork, batik work and hand-loomed fabrics are not difficult to learn to make and bring good prices. Raffia makes beautiful table mats and coverings for wine bottles. Shelves make droll little figures. Sheet celluloid makes costume jewelry, buttons, silhouettes, etc. A scroll or jigsaw is necessary for this work. Old inner tubes can be used to make marionettes. The rubber helps to make the dancing figures more realistic. Leather-covered boxes, desk pads, letter cases, telephone book covers, book carriers, and many other articles made of leather sell well in the stores today, especially at Christmas. Tooled leather work is not hard to learn. A surprisingly small number of tools are needed to carry on the entire work. Some of the plastics on the market today can be used to make ornamental and useful items that are money makers. Practically all the companies making this material furnish directions. Chapter 4. Raising things to sell. The next time you complain about making a living in the United States, think of that little party of pilgrims who landed at Plymouth Rock in 1620. Think of what they were up against. They had come to a new country, about which they knew very little, seeking religious freedom and an opportunity to prosper. The country to which they came had no currency. There was no government to guarantee their livelihood. There was no police force to protect their property. All they had was a lot of courage and as much ground as they required to raise the things they needed. And Mother Earth did not disappoint them. What they planted grew. The livestock which they brought from England multiplied. And by barter and trade, they laid the foundation of the New England Confederation, that group of states north of New Amsterdam which has since become known as New England. Any American who has a patch of ground, no matter if it be only the backyard of a city lot, is infinitely better off than his pilgrim forebears. At least he has close at hand a market for what he raises. He has the benefit of a medium of exchange, so that he can sell the things he raises for money. He enjoys the security and protection of the armed forces of the state in which he lives. He does not have to get out of bed in the middle of the night to fight off marauding Indians. And if he can devise a way of raising things that are in demand, he can expand his activities until he has built up a large and profitable business. No other country of the world, unless possibly it might be Canada, offers such opportunities to the man who is not afraid of work and who has a desire to raise things to sell. Under our present complex system of living, however, it is important that careful consideration be given to what you raise. It is not just a matter of planting corn and potatoes, as it was in the days of the Pilgrim Fathers. Corn and potatoes may be a drug on the market in the community in which you live, so it might be much smarter for you to raise something else. What that something else ought to be depends upon a lot of things. It depends upon what you are best qualified to raise, it depends upon what you would enjoy raising, it depends upon the needs of the people to whom you must sell the things you raise, and upon what can most profitably be raised in the particular locality in which you operate. A widow in Victoria, British Columbia, made thousands of dollars raising tuberous begonia bulbs. She started raising the bulbs as a hobby in the backyard of her Victoria home. Today, she has a big business and the begonias are shipped all over the world. Much of her success was due to the mild climatic conditions of that part of Vancouver Island. It does not follow that you would be as successful in a community less favored by nature. In the same way, there is a man in Florida who raises alligators for leather. He used to hunt them in the Everglades, but found he could make more money raising them. By raising them himself, he was able to get skins of just the right age and size, which is quite important. This man has made a great deal of money raising gators. But in order to conduct such a business successfully, you have to seek a locality which is favorable for the growing of alligators. An alligator farm would not go in Maine, but a mink farm might do amazingly well. So one of the first things to consider when you set out to raise something to sell, is to fit your product to the climate. Then, 2, give consideration to style changes. A chap in California spent a lot of money to start an ostrich farm. He made a great success of ostrich farming so far as raising the birds was concerned. But soon after he got things going well, ostrich plumes went out of style and he went broke. People who have not had much experience in raising things are inclined to look with favor upon various land development schemes. As a rule, these are not practical. Some years ago, a company was formed to plant and develop 7,000 acres of orange trees on Lake Pontchartrain, within the limits of the city of New Orleans. The land was cleared, drained, and planted in 5-acre groves. They were sold to people of moderate means in the north. The development company undertook to plant the trees, and cultivate the groves until the trees reached bearing age, then they were to be taken over by the grove owner and personally operated. In theory, the plan had many attractions. But it turned out to be a failure because the scale of operation was too big. When a freeze comes in a climate like New Orleans, an orange grower living on his land can get on the job and take precautions against the frost, either with oil heaters or smudge pots. It is an individual responsibility. There are today a number of small orange groves in lower Louisiana, which produce remarkably fine oranges, but almost without exception the owners live on the groves and are in a position to go into action quickly upon the first frost warnings. While there have been instances where these development schemes have worked out successfully, as a rule it is much better to put your money in an improved place of your own rather than in a big-scale development. The price of farmland is still low, but it is steadily increasing in value. Many businessmen are buying foreclosed farms as a hedge against inflation. If you are looking for a small place of your own on which to raise the things you intend to sell, you may find just what you are seeking from one of the insurance companies, or land banks. Other things being equal, the man who is going to raise things to sell, and whose capital is limited, should get as close as possible to his market. He cultivates violas for the market. In tree-studded Lafayette Square, a spacious park a little over a mile from San Francisco's business center, F. W. Davis's hobby of viola growing has become a profitable business, a business which has unsuspected money-making opportunities for all those who love flowers. The viola looks like a pansy except that instead of the pansy face thin dark rays spread out from a yellow center. 100 years ago the Swiss viola found in the Alps was blended with the pansy, bringing forth a blossom resembling both the violet and the pansy. Mr. Davis, a graduate of the Royal Horticultural Society of England, has been interested in flowers for 60 years, all his life. He has had charge of nurseries and chose viola raising as his hobby because of the opportunity it gave him to experiment and bring forth new creations in size, shape and color. For 25 years, while in charge of the Balboa nurseries in San Francisco, he put all his spare time into the development and evolution of the viola. He finally had one that he thought worthwhile, and when a sufficient supply was ready he took them to a leading florist. The viola was an immediate sensation. So instead of a hobbyist, Mr. Davis became a commercial grower with a demand constantly exceeding the supply. He soon needed more ground and was fortunate in leasing the historic place up in the heights of Lafayette Square. While the park is owned by the city, the mansion and its grounds are still under private ownership. There are 25 plots 4½ feet wide and from 30 to 80 feet long, tier upon tier, a solid acre of violas blending myriads of colors. As the cut flowers are ideal for decorative purposes, the entire output is marketed to San Francisco florists. Some of the plants are sold, but Mr. Davis makes no effort to sell them. At first people begged for a plant for their garden and cheerfully paid $5 for one. Prices now range from 50 cents up. 60 varieties are under cultivation, but the grower works continually on them and each year a new one is added. Getting new varieties is not exactly simple. It sometimes takes 1,000 seedlings to produce one worth cultivating. To bring out a red one is Mr. Davis's ambition. As a new variety appears, a name suggests itself. A pure white with gold center, for instance, is called Shasta after the Shasta daisy. The rainbow is radiantly colored, and one brownish purple is named Othello. Another purple suggests when Irish eyes are smiling, and is naturally Colleen. Then there's Cocktail, its browns and yellows indicate the reason. There was no backsliding in the viola business during the Depression. Mr. Davis went right on selling all he and his daughter, his only assistant, could raise. Like anyone who has found his right work, he's happy in it. A wiry, sparse, gray-haired man with a skin as bronzed as his khaki breeches, he conducts you through the grounds with quiet contentment. If you ask him whether he is kept busy, he answers, "Oh yes, I generally work 10 hours a day and sometimes 15 or 20. A map salesman learns how to raise and sell broilers. Thousands of people have started poultry farms. But not everyone has been successful. One who did succeed was Howard Whiteley, a salesman for a map publishing company. During the years he had been a special representative for the publisher, he had made a good salary and had saved his money. The doctor told him he had to give up his job and get outdoors in the sunshine as much as possible. So he decided to buy a 15-acre farm near Indianapolis. The former owner had tried to make a living by growing produce, but Whiteley decided to raise chickens. Not knowing a great deal about raising chickens, he sent to the U.S. Department of Agriculture for bulletins and studied them carefully. Then he visited a farmer in the neighborhood who had been raising poultry with indifferent success. Here he learned what not to do if he wanted to make money. Inquiry revealed that the farmer had little or no idea how to feed his chickens and practically no ideas on marketing them. His poultry house was filthy, and it was obvious that the chickens had little or no attention from one day to another. The farmer thought government bulletins and poultry magazines were a lot of nonsense. As if, he growled, you can learn to raise chickens from 4 book or a magazine. However, Howard Whiteley had his own ideas on this subject which he discreetly kept to himself. On his little farm there was a poultry house which he thoroughly cleaned and fumigated. He built a poultry run and then purchased a second-hand incubator and a brooder from a dealer in town. From another dealer he bought 10 dozen eggs and then he started his poultry business. Some of the eggs, of course, did not hatch. Of those that did, he kept about half for breeding, and the rest were raised for the market. In raising the chickens, he followed the government bulletins religiously. He found that cleanliness was the most important thing in keeping the chickens free from disease. By preventing all possible contamination, he not only saved himself a load of trouble but considerable expense. Naturally, he made a few mistakes, but none of them serious. He found, too, that he liked raising poultry. In the meantime, Whiteley had been thinking about his marketing problem. Having been a salesman, he realized it was one thing to raise a good product, but unless you got busy and sold it, there would be little profit to bank. By the time he had his poultry ready for market, he had secured orders from a number of old customers in Indianapolis as well as from 2 hotels and 3 restaurants. When his customers saw the plump, milk-fed broilers he had raised, they were sold to the hilt and he had no difficulty in getting reorders. He and his wife made a great effort to pack the birds attractively. Each capon was wrapped separately in white, moisture-proof wrapping paper, and packaged 4 to a box. His prices were slightly above the store price, but not a kick was received. He was supplying the market with what he knew the market wanted, a superior product. And the market was willing to pay for it. The hotels and restaurants gave him regular orders for poultry which he delivered every 2 or 3 days. His customers telephoned him when they wanted a broiler and often drove out for it. He kept a card record of all his orders, and when he failed to hear from a customer in a reasonable period of time, he followed him up by phone. Several friends of his old-time customers telephoned him orders, and he also added a fancy food shop to his list. This shop, which catered to Indianapolis 400, took only the very best of his broilers, and at very nice prices, too. Another good order he got was from the country club, which was situated about halfway between his farm and Indianapolis. He had heard that the club was planning a gala affair one weekend, so he interviewed the club manager, sold him a nice order of capons, and made a regular customer of him. Howard Whiteley made no attempt to market eggs as he realized that he could not develop a good egg breed as well as meat breed type and do justice to both. Whenever he had a surplus of eggs, he endeavored to sell them along with his poultry, but he never made any effort to secure a market for them. Mrs. Fox's Mink Ranch. Gertrude Fox, the wife of a busy doctor, tried to settle down to a peaceful, quiet life among the Westchester Hills. But like so many energetic, enthusiastic people, an inactive life was impossible for her. She began looking around for a hobby and, having previously raised domestic animals, decided that raising fur-bearing animals might be interesting. Her first idea was to develop a fox farm, but it had features that did not appeal to her. Somebody suggested mink ranching and she decided to give it a whirl. Knowing nothing about raising minks, she spent a whole year studying the subject, reading every available book published and every government pamphlet on it. She also visited the few mink ranches scattered throughout the East and the Middle West. Most of these ranches, she found, were stocked with Mississippi minks, whereas, the finest type of mink comes from the North Shore of Labrador. The pelts of these animals are as dark and glossy as sable. A coat made of an inferior grade of mink may bring only from $500 to $800, whereas, a coat made of Labrador skins brings from $6,000 to $12,000. She reasoned that she might as well raise the best as long as she was going to risk her time and money into the venture. She purchased her breeding stock, consisting of 11 males and 19 females, from a rancher in northeastern Quebec. These animals were pure Labradors, just one generation removed from the wild. She set up her pens on the South Salem estate and began experimenting, becoming, so far as is known, the first woman in this particular work. This was in 1929. In 1930 she was asked to exhibit her pets at the Women's Exposition of Arts and Industries, and it was this event which marked the turning point in her career. Not one visitor in 10 at this exposition had ever heard of a mink ranch, and interest ran high. From that time on, she was kept busy supplying breeding stock to people who wanted to start their own mink farms. As a matter of fact, while she started mink raising to sell the pelts, she has never been able to pelt any of her animals. They have all been sold as breeding stock to amateur mink ranchers. From raising minks she has drifted naturally into teaching others how to raise them. The beginners are instructed in methods of constructing pens and runways and in proper ways of handling and feeding the animals. Her interest in her customers, or students, as she terms them, extends a year after they have purchased their herds. During this time they may write to her about their problems and she will advise them on points of feeding and handling. As keeping the minks free from vermin is one difficulty in raising them, Mrs. Fox emphasizes the importance of building pens so that they are raised from the ground. With the exception of death from pneumonia, there are almost no fatalities from disease, and if their bedding is always dry, minks are not likely to have even this disease. The minks are fed a varied diet of beef, horse meat, ground bone, eggs, milk, cereals, tomatoes, cod liver oil, and fish. Each animal must be segregated from his fellows, as the mink is a vicious little beast and will attack any other mink that comes near him. Fighting must be prevented at all costs, as in addition to possible deaths which may occur, the pelts may be severely damaged. The mink mates once a year, in the spring, and the litter consists of about 5 or 6 young. The young are born about 50 days after mating and are hidden by the mother in her nest until they are about 4 weeks old. When an excessive litter occurs, the young are raised by another mother mink or by a cat. Besides managing 2 ranches of her own, providing breeding stock for amateur ranchers, and publishing a monthly bulletin on fur trade conditions, Mrs. Fox owns and edits the Black Fox magazine and recently published a book by the title of Raising Minks in Captivity. Raising mink for Milady's evening wrap is one way of making money in a business that combines outdoor life with an interesting vacation. This modern ranch house, made of Silatex, is on the Butler Mink Ranch at Houghton, Michigan. The popularity of goldfish for use as premiums as well as for use in home aquariums and garden pools offers another opportunity for those who like outdoor life. These are the Grass Fork Fisheries at Martinsville, Indiana. Goat dairying, a coming business. Robert Fern, Norbeck, Maryland, is a goat dairyman, and a very successful one. He seldom raises any kids, as he finds it more economical to buy new milking stock each fall and sell his culls in the spring. When he began business, he had 125 does for which he paid $10 a head. But he learned it paid to buy better stock. Now he has about 30 for which he paid from $50 to $75 each. From these 30 does he gets 4 times as much milk as from the 125 inferior ones. In December and January, he gets about 70 pints daily from 25 does, in summer, 200 pints. The 6 or 8 quart does, so eagerly sought by the beginner in goat keeping, are of little interest to Mr. Fern. He considers a doe, even when she is giving but 3 pints a day, a profitable one. Animals, which give around 6 to 8 quarts a day, are very rare and are hardly ever for sale. Generally speaking, a production of 2 quarts a day is fair, 3 quarts good, and anything over that, excellent. The does in Mr. Fern's dairy are not permitted to run about as they please. They must lie down, chew their cuds and make milk. At milking time they go in groups of 10 to the milking room, stand in stanchions and are fed. Great care is taken to see that the milk is pure. It takes about 30 minutes to prepare them for milking and to milk them. By that time they have eaten their feed. By milking 3 times a day, he finds that he gets more milk. Soybean hay, states Mr. Fern, produces the best milk. Lespedeza is, without doubt, the coming roughage. The goats are very keen about it when they can get it. Feeding rations vary considerably, and each breeder or dairyman must experiment until he finds the proper combination of feeds for his stock. Information on this subject can be secured from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington, D.C., from the Goat World, which is the official publication of the American Milk Goat Record Association, and from recent books which have been published on raising goats. The purebred goat selected by most breeders for stock today is an imported type. The American or scrub goat does not give good milk production, and its kids command very low prices. The 4 types usually purchased by breeders and dairymen are the Toggenburg, Saanen, Nubian, and Alpine. The Toggenburg is the biggest milk producer and is, therefore, the goat most frequently purchased by dairymen. The Nubian is noted for the richness of its milk, the butterfat content being much higher than in any of the other breeds. The price of a purebred doe runs from $100 to $800. Purebred doe kids weaned at 3 months old, from $50 to $100. Buck kids, $35 to $75, and good grade does, $35 to $75. Naturally, the better the stock, the higher the price. All purebred goats should be registered with the American Milk Goat Record Association. Goat milk sells for 25 cents to 50 cents a quart. As it is the nearest animal milk to human milk, it is an excellent food for babies. However, being much richer than cow's milk, it must be diluted by more than 50% before a baby can assimilate it. Goat milk is alkaline instead of acid, cow's milk is acid, so it is an excellent food for invalids, old people, and those suffering from stomach disturbances. Goat milk also contains one important mineral which cow's milk lacks: iron. The taste of goat's milk is very palatable if the animal has been fed correctly. There will be absolutely no disagreeable odor or taste if the doe's stall is kept clean, the milk is handled in a sanitary manner, and the bucks are kept in another stable altogether. As the goat is practically free from tuberculosis, its milk does not carry the dread disease germ. But to make certain that the goats are not likely to contact tuberculosis, they should be kept away from cows. Mr. Fern's merchandising methods are particularly interesting. Instead of selling to hospitals and doctors, he has placed small refrigerators in drugstores in Washington and Baltimore. They are attractively labeled and have glass doors that give a view of the pint-sized paper bottles of goat milk. Each pint bottle sells for 25 cents and they have a ready sale. The dairyman may also find a market for goat's milk in the canneries, which are now putting up a brand of evaporated, unsweetened goat's milk. This retails for 20 cents a can of 11 ounces, which is equivalent to about 30 cents a quart for the original milk. Another use for goat's milk is in cheese. Several varieties may be made and the manufacture is quite a simple process. The United States Department of Agriculture has published directions for making cheese in its bulletin on raising milk goats. A doe averaging 2 quarts a day for 10 months produces 600 quarts. At 25 cents a quart, this returns an income of $150. Feed for the doe for 12 months at 10 cents a day would be $36. The profit less the labor cost would be $114. A 3-quart doe would give about 900 quarts at 25 cents or $225. The feed would probably cost a little more, say 121% cents daily or $45. This would make a profit less the labor cost of $180. This little comparison between the 2 and 3-quart milker easily shows how much more profitable the better milker can be. It is conservatively said that a good doe will pay her purchase price back in milk each year and an extra dividend in kids. Breeding and renting stock. Those who are interested in breeding stock rather than in the dairy end of the business, will find a ready market for kids through the dairies. Many dairymen who do not want to bother raising their own stock, buy new milking stock each fall for their dairies. As the prices for purebred doe kids at 3 months run around $50 to $100, the sale of such stock brings the breeder a tidy little sum of money. While there is a rather general prejudice in this country against the use of goat meat for food, thousands of goats of the milk type, especially kids, are consumed annually. In some parts of the South, kids are considered a delicacy and are in demand. They are sold for slaughter when from 8 to 12 weeks of age. The prices of goats sold on the market for slaughter are always considerably less than those received for sheep. Although most of the goatskins used in the United States are imported, there is a market for domestic goatskins which are worth from 25 to 50 cents each. In large lots and properly prepared for sale, they bring a higher price. Another way to make money with goats is to rent them. Some families require goat milk for only a short time and prefer to rent rather than buy a doe. The rental for a good doe may be as high as $10 a month. In case of the death of the doe during the time it is rented, the owner must be reimbursed for her full estimated value. A fair basis for the charge of renting out a doe would be a reasonable price per quart for the milk she would probably produce during the period wanted. A different kind of poultry farm. A chicken farm, organized along factory lines, has been a great success in the Cast. This poultry farm near Cockeysville, Maryland, covers only 1 acre of ground. The 61,000 chickens handled by this farm would require 610 acres if they were being raised and fed in the usual manner. On this farm, however, the chickens never touch the ground, never go outdoors. They live in tiers of wire cages, in large, air-conditioned, disinfected, thermostatically heated and cooled, photoelectrically lighted rooms. There are no nests for the 2,500 laying hens, as the cages are so arranged that eggs, when laid, roll down into a little rack outside. Here the eggs are picked up by attendants on hourly collection rounds. Under these conditions, the daily production of laying hens is 58% as against the usual 50% figure. Elmer Kennedy has a lot of fun and makes some real money, keeping bees on his place at St. Edward, Nebraska. But you don't have to have a farm to keep bees. A backyard, or even an attic, will do. The sign outside of the place where this hen house is located reads "Eggs laid while you wait." As fast as the eggs are laid, they roll down the track and start on their way to market. The chicken's food is within easy reach of each cage, being supplied on a conveyor belt which runs on each tier. A constant drip of water is provided from a metal nipple at the top of the cages. A second conveyor belt, running under the cages, catches the waste matter which is carried to a bin and they're removed periodically to be used in making a high-grade fertilizer. As any infection would be disastrous to the entire flock of 61,000 chickens, the utmost cleanliness prevails. Each room is disinfected once a day and, at short intervals, all cages are subjected to live steam. The 21 employees wear spotless uniforms, the women being dressed in white and the men in striped linen trousers and coats. This factory-operated farm has created such interest that not only have farmers in adjacent communities made trips to the farm, but those from distant lands, such as Egypt and Africa. In fact, so numerous are the visitors during the weekends, that the cages have been separated from the onlookers by walls of glass in order to minimize the danger of infection. Selling fighting fish by mail. When Bill Klaber, of San Francisco, took up the hobby of breeding Siamese fighting fish and other tropical varieties, he little realized he was starting what has since turned out to be a national fish business. Bill's regular job is a glass worker for a paint manufacturer. He began raising tropical fish 3 years ago, having bought some fish from a friend who was going out of business. As usual, Bill delved deeply into his subject, reading everything he could find, even buying expensive books unobtainable in the library. He applied what he read and added constantly to his stock. Fanciers heard of his fine collection and came to buy. Bill Klaber was amazed at the marketing possibilities and the eagerness of people to secure a coveted specimen. So he became a dealer as well as a fancier before many months passed. He had made contact with seamen to secure rare fish for him when they went inland for fresh water in the tropics. Today he maintains tanks on a number of boats that reach the tropics, paying seamen to look after his interests. When an opportunity came 3 months ago to buy a small hatchery complete, Bill moved his outfit to a larger store which he remodeled and called Kay's Aquarium. His wife spends part of each day there and he keeps open evenings and Sundays. There's a tropical atmosphere about Kay's Aquarium. Innumerable tiny fish, streaks of iridescence and brilliant color, dart about in small tanks. Aquatic plants furnish both oxygen and decoration. Caring for the fish is easy. The real work is in breeding, but therein lies its fascination. It means time and patience and often disappointment, but Bill Klaber never tires of hybridizing and trying for perfect specimens. Some species, such as the scale-array, are particularly difficult to handle. These fellows, he explains, won't marry unless the bride pleases them, and it takes finesse and many females to induce them to become breeders. The fact is that Bill is one of the 2 or 3 fanciers in town who have succeeded in making Benedicts out of the scale-array. Another rare specimen deposits its orange-colored eggs in an even row on a long reed, and the male and female spell one another, guarding the eggs and foraging for food. The betta or Siamese fighting fish, in which he specializes, are kept singly in mayonnaise jars because if placed together they would fight each other to the death. In Siam, bettas are used for gambling, and fortunes have been won or lost on the outcome of staged battles. The little savage is correspondingly tender in courtship, however, guarding the fertilized spawn against would-be devourers, including its erstwhile mate. Volumes might be written about the tiny tank dwellers. Bill's initial stock of 30 that cost him $2 has increased to several hundreds. He receives orders from Texas, the Middle West, even Canada, and his weekly profit sometimes exceeds his salary. How does he get his trade? News travels among fanciers and occasionally he advertises. One reason for his success is his practice of selling only healthy stock. He believes that while sloughing off sickly fish is easy, it is a foolish thing to do. Another reason for his success is because he sets up the aquarium, if desired, keeps in touch with customers, and gives the buyer help whenever he can. A map in his outer room illustrates his thoroughness. Patiently he worked out a list of tropical fish and their habitats. On a map of the world he printed the names of various fish in the section where they are to be found. The map, besides being informative, is an aid in selecting stock. Breeding dogs for fun and profit. Do you like dogs? Do dogs like you? Then why not turn that liking into dollars? Why not combine business with pleasure and raise dogs? Perhaps no business offers better opportunities for making money in your spare time or to develop a national reputation in your field. This happened in the case of Mrs. Harold Cluxton, of Chicago, regarded as one of the most successful breeders of Russian wolfhounds in America. Mrs. Cluxton became interested in breeding dogs as a means of occupying her time. She was presented with a very fine pair of Russian wolfhounds by a friend in Canada and soon became intensely interested in the breed. She read and studied everything she could find on dog breeding. She subscribed to all the dog magazines published both here and in England and even went so far as to study the Russian language, so that she could read what was published in that country on wolfhounds. She has carried off nearly all the prizes for wolfhounds in most of the shows, and has obtained as high as $5,000 for a single dog. One of the nice things about breeding and raising dogs is that you can start with as little as $100 capital. True, you cannot get a blue ribbon dog for any such sum, but with a little shopping around and good judgment you can get a likely bitch for that amount in a number of popular breeds. First of all, decide upon the breed on which you intend to specialize and get a registered bitch of the best bloodlines possible. The bitch should be healthy and should not vary in type from the breed she represents. In other words, if the breed is supposed to be heavy of bone, select breeding stock with this characteristic. Check up on the breed carefully and find out the main points upon which the animals are judged, then try to get as many good points in your breeding stock as you possibly can. If possible, purchase stock from a line in which there have been blue ribbon winners, as this gives you a good selling point to talk about to prospective purchasers. As in every business, there are hazards in dog raising. Worms and distemper take the greatest toll of puppies, but both can be controlled if the breeder is careful. At the beginning, it is wise to invest money in the services of a good veterinary to handle the first few litters, to worm the puppies and take care of any other problems with which you are not familiar. This will, of course, cost you extra money and must be figured in your overhead. In addition, you will need the services of a veterinary to guard your kennel against distemper. Every breeder who wishes to protect himself, as well as his customers, against losses from distemper, has his puppies inoculated against this dread disease at the proper time. If you take chances with this disease, you are sure to regret it, as the expense of bringing even one puppy through it is considerable. So many times the veterinary cannot save the dog, and then the expensive treatments, plus the loss of the dog, will eat up your profits. If you like dogs, you probably have attended the dog shows and know something about the various breeds. Of course, the most popular dog appears at the dog shows in great numbers. One year it will be the German Shepherds, commonly called police dogs; another year, wire-haired terriers; another year Airedales of Scotties. Then there are certain breeds that never seem to go out of style. Over a period of time these have been the Boston Bull Terriers, the Pekingese, and the Cocker Spaniel. Certain types of hunting dogs are always popular. The setter, both English and Irish, is favored by those who never shoot game as well as by the sportsmen. The German Shepherd has been another unusually popular dog, but as he is not quite suited to city life, his popularity is beginning to wane. For the city type of home, and especially for those who live in apartment buildings, the following dogs are the most suitable, due to their size and their adaptability to city life. Boston Bull Terriers, French Bulldogs, Dachshunds, wire-haired Fox Terriers, Smooth Fox Terriers, Cocker Spaniels, Scottish Terriers, Irish Terriers, the Pekingese, the Pomeranian, the Sealyham, Miniature Schnauzer, Japanese Spaniel, and the Yorkshire Terrier. For the suburban home, the dogs just listed in the following are the most suitable breeds. English and Irish Setters, Irish Water Spaniels, the Springer Spaniel, Airedale Terriers, Collies, Doberman Pinschers, German Shepherds, Dalmatian Hounds, Chow Chows, German Schnauzer, medium size, Pointers, Beagle Hounds, Gordon Setters, Bull Terriers, and Bulldogs. For the large estate or farm, the following dogs may be added to those listed for the suburban home. Russian Wolfhound, Irish Wolfhound, the largest of all dogs, St. Bernard, Mastiff, Great Dane, Newfoundland, Labrador Retriever, Shetland Sheepdog. If you are in a section where there is considerable hunting each year, the following hunting breeds may sell well. Springer Spaniels, Irish Water Spaniels, Beagle Hounds, Rabbit Hounds, Coon Hounds, Deer Hounds, Fox Hounds, Labrador Retrievers, English and Irish Setters, Pointers, Llewellyn and Gordon Setters. Regardless of the fact that in your locality there may exist a market for the larger breed of dogs such as the St. Bernard, Mastiff, Great Dane, etc., the beginner may do well to cultivate another market to which he can sell the smaller breeds. The reasons for this are obvious. Unless you have a rather large amount of ground, you cannot maintain kennels for the larger breeds, and the food bill for these breeds is an important item in your overhead, as you will realize once you have seen a St. Bernard eat a meal. Raising dogs naturally entails a great deal of work. Kennels must be kept immaculate to ward off disease, the dogs must be brushed and combed, their food must be carefully prepared, and they must be fed at regular periods. When ill, they must be segregated and carefully tended, not only for humanitarian reasons but for financial reasons also. The dam must be cared for, especially at whelping time, and the puppies must be given a great deal of attention. Then there is weaning, which means more work. However, if you really like to handle dogs, all this work will be interesting and therefore not drudgery. For advertising, you will need to have some cards printed for prospects who come to see the pups. The local paper should carry your advertising, and every merchant in your vicinity should know that you are a breeder of Scotties, Bostons, or whatever breed you intend handling. An advertisement in the Sunday morning edition of the largest circulation newspaper in your city, or, if you live in the suburbs or country, the nearest large city, will often bring prospects. Be sure to include your telephone number. Many small breeders raise dogs as a sideline and manage a full-time job also. In this case, someone else in the family must have the routine care of the dogs. One interesting example is that of a laundry driver in Chicago who worked 6 days a week for one of the largest laundries in the city. He and his wife lived in a little cottage on a 3-acre place on the edge of town. Both of them were unusually fond of dogs and hunting. Having purchased a fine English setter for their hunting trips, they decided to put him at stud. The charge made for this was $25, and in addition they received 2 male puppies from the litter, each of which sold for $35. The dog was bred again at the same charge, and 2 pups again were sold for $35 and $40. With this money, they purchased a Cocker Spaniel of good blood lines and placed him at stud. The first 2 pups they received, a male and a female, sold for $35 and $30, respectively. The female usually brings a lower price than the male puppies. Later a female Cocker Spaniel was purchased which came from a blue ribbon line, and the litters from this pair sold from $35 to $45 a puppy. Fresh eggs from his own chickens, rich milk from a nearby farmer, careful feeding and plenty of sunshine gave his puppies good bone and muscle and shining coats. They practically sold themselves on site. Naturally, his customers were told about these puppies when they were available, and many orders were received through their word-of-mouth advertising. A friendly arrangement with a training school for hunting dogs gave him some good leads, and at the same time provided the school with the names of those who had made recent purchases of puppies. Beekeeping for profit. George Jessup, Council Bluffs, Iowa, began raising bees as a sideline. Before long, this sideline returned enough profits to more than take care of expenses, and today his income from beekeeping exceeds $1,000 annually. In fact, bees not only pay all his household expenses, but enable him to put a good round sum in the bank every year. Few occupations, says Jessup, offer the interest and relaxation beekeeping affords, and for the office worker it has the additional incentive of being carried on out of doors. I started with 1 colony in a large hive, which I was told would provide ample room for brooding and winter storage, eliminate swarming, and provide large combs for the queen bee, thus making her more efficient. My initial expenses for bees and equipment ran about $20, and my cost of producing honey that year was $5. The colony produced 100 pounds of honey, all of which I sold locally to retailers at an average price of 60 cents a pound, getting back $60 for my small investment. The second year the colony was increased greatly by a winter brood, so I split it, and made a second colony, which also came in with 100 pounds of honey. That, I found, was about the average yield for each bee colony. Meanwhile, I was so pleased with the way the beekeeping was going, that I increased the number of colonies to 10, and sold some of the honey at wholesale, getting an average of 45 cents a pound for it. There is, of course, more work connected with the 10 colonies, but not a great deal more, as about all there is to do is gather the honey. Bees do not require much attention. You can leave them alone for several days and they will feed themselves and work for you while you are away. Last year, I added 15 more colonies, to bring the total number to 25, and my profit increased proportionately. Most of the honey I produce goes to local grocers. Some of it I ship to Dubuque and points not too distant. I sell to local grocers at 47 cents a pound, as a general rule, and get 45 to 50 cents from outside markets. When I sell to the consumer, I get 65 cents a pound, and I did a lot of consumer business last year. It's in that market most of the money is to be made. However, I haven't been able to take the time to properly develop consumer demand, although I've been determined for a long time to go after it. Beekeeping is fascinating as well as profitable. You can keep bees in any place, the cellar, barn, garage, attic, or even in a closet which has an outside window, and be perfectly sure that as long as you have a good queen in charge, the colony will stay put. If the colony is permitted to get too large, however, there is a chance that a queen coming out of the winter brood will lure a portion of them to swarm in a hollow tree somewhere. So it is good policy to watch them and separate them, giving the queens from your brood a house of their own so they won't lure other bees to swarm. I believe much of my success has been due to the use of the Caucasian bees exclusively. These bees are gentler and permit you to work among them faster than you could with other types. They seem to be less inclined to develop disease, and their crop of honey is fully as good as the Italian bee. Experience has taught me the disadvantages of the big hive, however, and I now use standard 10-frame equipment, with full-depth hive bodies for supers. I simplify the provisioning of the brood chamber by slipping in a frame of honey from another super, assuring ample winter stores. Combs with patches of drone are easily removed by exchanging with combs from supers and allowing the brood to emerge above. When the comb is filled with honey at the end of the season, it is handled right along with the rest of the crop until extracted. A mark across the top bar, made with a hive tool, makes its identification simple and disposal sure. A bee apiary may be started with a few dollars. A small colony will more than pay for itself in a short time, and furnish a hobby or a sideline that is immensely fascinating. Housing equipment may be made by yourself, or may be purchased for as little as $10. The equipment is designed as a permanent colony home, and is built to withstand freezing temperatures. Bees may be secured at very reasonable prices. You may buy a 2-pound package of baby bees, with a young queen, for as little as $2. 2 or 3 of such packages will start a very fine colony for you, and will soon be producing 100 pounds of honey annually or better. It may be pointed out that the existing demand for honey far exceeds visible supply, and that a good price may be obtained for your entire honey yield all the year round. Wholesale prices vary somewhat in different sections of the country, ranging from 35 to 70 cents a pound. Retail prices range between 55 cents and $1 a pound. In all but a few sections, however, wholesale prices hold pretty steadily at about 50 cents a pound, and retail, run about 70 cents. There's a big demand for ornamental birds. I turned 60 acres, not suitable for farming, into pens for raising ornamental birds, said John Keller, of Kenosha, Wisconsin. This land has a pond at one end and a shallow creek runs through it, but the rocks and marshy spots make it bad pasture. It was the pond that made me think of trying my luck with swans. These 60 acres being handy to the house would be ideal for swan raising, I figured, because I could easily watch the birds. I paid $65 for a pair of white swans, fenced off pen space for them at the edge of the pond. I read a good deal about the swan's habits and found it is an affectionate bird which, once mated, will never leave its mate. They lay in March, April, and May, prefer to live by themselves, and must be kept away from animals. My first brood was 7 young swans, and by the end of the summer, I had 18 swans. The swan, being very hardy, is not difficult to raise. It requires less care than a turkey or a chicken, and brings higher prices. My original investment was $65 for the first pair and $30 for fencing. By Christmas, I had sold 8 pair of young swans, at $70 a pair. I kept the others for breeding. In 2.5 years, I've raised and sold 150 pair of swans at an average price of $60. Shortly after I started the swans, I decided to experiment a little with peacocks as I had plenty of room. The peacock, I soon discovered, needed a high fence around the entire area used for raising him, since these birds have the habit of roosting on housetops, trees, and other high places, and refuse to sleep in a coop. They are quite hardy birds, almost as easy to handle as swans, and are not bothered much by the cold. They are more prolific than the swan, and because of the beauty of their plumage sell for big prices. I get up to $95 for a pair of well-matched green peacocks, and last year sold 76 pair at this price. About the only thing I have to watch closely is that no dogs or other small animals get into the big pens. While the swan and peacock are large birds, well able to take care of themselves in any battle with a dog, the presence of a dog or the threat of one visiting them is sufficient to keep the birds from laying. Frighten a peacock or swan and it seems to lose all desire to lay. The swan is not subject to disease such as attacked chickens, hence loss through disease and sickness is practically nil. The peacock and the swan mate for life, and care should be taken to discover how they mate up, and not to break up mated birds. I figure the cost for raising a swan to be about $3, and $3.25 for a peacock. This includes the cost of making the pens, feeding, and incidental expenses, except labor. The work of looking after the birds, which is done by my wife and myself, takes only an hour or 2 each day. The raising of ornamental birds takes more space than would be required for other fowl, inasmuch as these birds like to strut and preen themselves a good deal. There are many farms having marginal land that might profitably be devoted to raising these birds. A ready market is always at hand, as the demand for peacocks and swans, by public parks, zoos, private estates, playgrounds, public and private institutions, and universities, is greater than the existing supply. Other ornamental birds may be raised along with swans and peacocks with little added cost. For example, the Chinese mandarin duck, wood duck and red-billed tree duck will get along well with the swans, while golden and silver pheasants and pearl guinea fowl will thrive with the peacocks. A smart way to market broilers. When Mrs. Alice Moffat, who lives on the outskirts of Blue Island, Illinois, decided it was up to her to help balance the family budget, she turned to raising broilers to make money. After several months of experimenting with marketing ideas, she hit upon a method that enabled her to earn more than $1,000 from her venture. Like many others who start a chicken ranch, I thought all one had to do was feed the little chicks, keep them warm, and when they were 12 weeks old, sell them to the butcher. I knew nothing about marketing poultry. I soon found out, however, that to make a big profit from broilers, they should be dressed and packaged attractively before marketing. I followed the accepted practice of buying one-day-old chicks from responsible hatcheries. Putting them in brooders, I carried them along until they were 12 weeks old. In developing the pullets for market, I made many mistakes which I have since corrected. I had permitted the chickens to run in a large pen which made their flesh tough. Now I no longer let them run about but keep them in a special broiler plant, and they bring better prices. Keeping the chicks in the broiler plant enables me to feed and care for 500-day-old chicks in a small space. At 12 weeks they are ready for market and bring top prices. At first, I shipped the live pullets to the wholesale house, but I soon discovered that the loss from shrinkage in shipping, regardless of distance, is about 10%, which cuts heavily into their market value. Pullets lose weight when shipped due to handling and irregular feeding. The first time I checked this loss against the price paid me by the commission companies, I couldn't understand it. I was doing a big business but wasn't making money. So I experimented with some marketing ideas. Instead of selling the pullets alive, I dressed them and packaged them in attractive pasteboard boxes labeled milk-fed broilers. I sold them to the butchers who get a few cents a pound more for dressed broilers attractively wrapped in waxed paper than they can get for live pullets. Experience convinces me that crossbred pullets make the best broilers. Their hybrid vigor makes them gain faster than purebred chickens, and they generally weigh 30% more at 12 weeks than a purebred pullet. But in growing pullets for broiler purposes, the most important thing is the feed. Only a good feed can develop a broiler to the limit of its inherent capacity. A chick of the heavier breeds will gain up to 30 times its weight in a period of a few weeks if given a carefully selected prepared feed. While Mrs. Moffat now has a chicken house 40 feet long and 18 feet wide, she started in a very small way, investing only $60 altogether. The present house cost $190 and her investment in equipment amounted to $160. This total of $350 was part of her profits. She pays 4 cents for one-day-old chicks in 500 quantities. 500 chicks, when 12 weeks old, cost a total of $120. When dressed, packaged in pasteboard containers, and wrapped in waxed paper, they bring Mrs. Moffat a profit of about $250. The cost of packaging of the pullets runs almost 4 cents each. Chickens for broiler purposes are not difficult to raise. As many as 200 may be developed in a comparatively small space, with a small broiler plant. A ready market is furnished in every fair-sized city, especially during the spring. Prices for broilers vary with the season. Only chicks from disease-free stock should be used for broilers. Sickly chickens do not have the necessary stamina, and the high percentage of loss through death wipes out the profits. Raising rabbits for their wool. Do you know that rabbit fur is dyed and used in the manufacture of synthetic sealskin coats? Well, it is, and it offers one more way for a wide-awake person to make $1,000. Blanche Crabble, of Toledo, Ohio, had been raising rabbits for their pelts which she had been selling to a tannery at a profit. However, she discovered that she could make about as much money by shearing the rabbits for their wool instead of using the whole pelt. Her hutches now contain 900 rabbits which supply rabbit wool for commercial purposes. I hated to kill the rabbits for their pelts, Blanche said, because I became so attached to them. But I had so many of them and they multiplied so rapidly that I could not afford to keep them. I had to get money out of them some way, and when a friend suggested shearing them and selling their fur for wool, my problem was solved. Rabbit fur is softer than lamb's wool, and not so greasy. My problem was to find out if there was a demand for the wool and, upon making inquiries, I learned about the rabbit's commercial value as a wool producer. The Angora, with its unusually long silky hair, is the ideal rabbit for wool production. There are regular markets for this wool in all big cities, such as Detroit, Chicago, and New York. Upon making this discovery, I sheared the rabbits and shipped the wool to the nearest market. Rabbit wool is used for any number of things, such as knitting sweaters, baby clothes, muffs, scarves and dresses. It makes a beautiful yarn which has the strength and durability of regular sheep wool, although it is much finer and softer. I receive $1.40 a pound for this wool and shear the rabbits 4 times a year. The Angora rabbit is unusually large, and each one produces about 1 1/4 pounds of wool yearly. The rabbit is one of the most easily raised of all the fur-bearing animals, and as many as 500 rabbits may be successfully raised in your own backyard. They are not subject to vermin of any kind, and resist practically all ailments. Success requires only ordinary attention to sanitation and cleaning the rabbit hutches regularly. The cost of raising rabbits in quantities of 100 or more is about 10 cents a rabbit. Miss Crabble gives this suggestion on breeding to those interested in raising rabbits. Secure 2 bred does and a buck from a reliable breeder who will guarantee them to be healthy, pedigreed stock. Specify that the buck must be from a different litter than the does, so he may be used when breeding the does litters later on. This precaution will enable you to mate the rabbits in the first and second litters without danger of inbreeding. Rabbits reproduce prolifically, and with good stock to start, you soon will have a number of animals with saleable pelts. You can dispose of them through a tannery or, if you prefer, shear them for their wool. Glad Garden brings joy and profit. 8 years ago, Lucretia Case Hansen, of Mill Valley, California, was confronted with the problem of supporting 5 children and a husband whose ill health had forced him to quit business. Mrs. Hansen is 5 feet tall and weighs 100 pounds, but she shouldered the burden without flinching. At first she was a Jill of all trades. Finally, she applied for a job with the Mill Valley Record, a newspaper edited by two capable women. Perhaps women editors are soft-hearted. Anyway, Mrs. Hanson got work in the office and has been there ever since. Evenings she typed letters for a blind businessman, coached in French, English and mathematics, and looked after her brood and her 9-room house. Meanwhile, Mr. Hanson busied himself with his hobby of raising gladioli. He had the knack and the glads responded by blossoming in gorgeous profusion. People raved over their exceptional beauty and wanted to buy, but Mr. Hanson gave the flowers away in great armfuls until his wife suggested, if they want to buy, why not sell? They discussed commercial distribution and Mrs. Hanson called on the owner of the town's swankiest market. Would he put their gladioli in for sale? He consented, saying that flowers like theirs would be an asset. His only stipulation was that they be arranged before the store opened. Mrs. Hanson got up still earlier 6 mornings a week, and while the fresh produce was being set out she arranged masses of glads in tall vases. 50 dozen were sold the first month, which added $25 to the Hanson income. As the grocer refused a commission, Mrs. Hanson insisted that he take home all the flowers he wanted on Saturdays and whenever his wife gave a party. The sale of bulbs followed naturally. Customers wanted certain varieties for their gardens. One big seller was a pale yellow which has been named Billionaire because of its great stalk and the profusion of blossoms, sometimes 20 to a stalk. Billionaires were popular for wedding decorations and floral sprays. It wasn't long before she found there was another outlet for the flowers. Although several large nurseries are located in outlying districts, there is no florist in Mill Valley, consequently the undertaker sells sprays. In return for services rendered, he taught Mrs. Hanson how to wire sprays and she began getting orders which brought from $2 up. Soon other ideas for getting orders presented themselves. A donation now and then to the leading tea room brought orders for decorations when banquets were held there. A bouquet presented to the owner when a new store opened in town increased trade, did an occasional advertisement in the Record. On one outstanding occasion, Red Glads banked the platform of the San Francisco Civic Auditorium where 10,000 people gathered at the International Convention of the Christian Endeavor to celebrate that society's Golden Jubilee. Selling glads has been fun, and although it hasn't meant a fortune, the money has often been a godsend, Mrs. Hanson remarks. Besides, being gainfully occupied has saved Mr. Hanson much worry and unhappiness. There is a growing market for love birds. Some years ago, Mrs. E. H. Ormond, of Chicago, bought 11 canary hens and 5 males. 7 of these birds were pedigreed rollers and the rest California warblers. She bought them for breeding purposes, with the idea of raising pedigreed singers which she could sell to local pet shops. Her profits from this enterprise soon exceeded her expectations. I kept the first 60 birds that were hatched for breeding stock, said Mrs. Ormond to one of the editors of this book. These I placed in what I call my breeding room, and when these birds were hatched, I sold them to local pet shops at an average price of $30 a dozen. The first year, I produced a total of 117 singers which I quickly sold. This year, I will have about 800 ready for market, maybe more. Starting out on a small scale, however, delayed the accumulation of big profits, but now I'm making good money. As I figured that my time wasn't worth much, I haven't considered the cost of labor in computing my profits. My average cost for raising a canary is 35 cents and my price to the shops varies between $11 and $60 a dozen. As my birds are all pedigreed, they bring good prices in the pet shops. Many of them retail for as high as $10. Half of each year's canary crop generally consists of males. Most of the females I keep since they do not command as high a price as males in the market. In addition to the sales to the pet shops, there is a good demand for birds from people living in the neighborhood. I do not cut prices to make sales, for I find that bird lovers do not hesitate to pay the usual retail price when they come in and look over my aviary. I try to discourage this retail business, however, as it puts me in competition with the pet shops. Shortly after I started selling my canaries to the pet shops, some dealers urged me to raise parakeets or love birds, as there was a growing demand for them. So I bought a few pair of parakeets about 2 years ago, and have had considerable success raising them. They will breed in single pairs, but do better in 3-pair or bigger cages. They are remarkably good setters and feeders, and bring their brood to maturity in almost every case. Last year, from 100 pair of love birds, I succeeded in raising and selling 965 birds. Love birds are far prettier than canaries and are hardier and more intelligent. They are always in perfect plumage and many of them will sing as well as canaries. People who buy them for pets find they can take them from the nest when young and raise them by hand. They become attached to their caretaker and learn to chatter like a parrot if kept by themselves. My average cost of raising a love bird is 26 cents, and I sell them at $12 a dozen wholesale. Any person fond of birds may find it as profitable as Mrs. Ormond does to raise them. In every big city there is always a demand for singing birds, And people are willing to pay good prices for birds they want as pets. Raising goldfish for premiums. Back in 1900, Eugene C. Schureman was selling washing powder for a company which had hit upon the bright idea of offering a small bowl and a pair of goldfish as a premium. This premium idea worked so well that they soon ran out of goldfish, and Schureman decided to turn a swamp, which he had received as a legacy years ago, into a fish farm and sell his crop to the company. He stocked his pool with 200 goldfish, which multiplied rapidly. But by the time he was turning out sufficient fish to sell, the company had gone out of business. However, there were other outlets, and today, the fish are sold through 5 and 10 stores, pet shops, chain stores, drug stores, florists, department stores, etc. The various state departments are also a market for goldfish, which are used extensively in mosquito control work. The goldfish, which belong to the carp family, are exceedingly fond of the mosquito larvae and will clear a stagnant pond of water of these pests in no time. From a small start with 200 fish in 1900, Eugene Schureman has developed the famous Grassy Fork Fisheries at Martinsville, Indiana, and has raised over 75 million fish. Grassy Fork Fisheries consist of 1,500 acres of gently rolling hills and give employment to 125 persons. There are 615 ponds as well as 216 hatching tanks. The ponds and tanks are terraced so that they can be fed with a continuous circuit of fresh water from the numerous springs located on the property. 160,000 carefully selected goldfish are reserved as breeding stock at the Grassy Fork hatcheries. Branch shipping points are maintained at Chicago, Illinois, and Saddle River, New Jersey. From Martinsville, the goldfish are shipped via a fleet of tank trucks. From Chicago and Saddle River, the fish are shipped to the customers via express, in peculiar, globe-shaped shipping cans. In addition to the goldfish, the Grassy Fork hatcheries also raise some 40 varieties of toy tropical fish which have recently become so popular, such as gouramis, the live-bearing guppies, helleri, and other species. As these fish are less hardy than the common goldfish, the tanks in which they are raised are located indoors in greenhouses. An important part of this business is the aquatic plant department. About 60 varieties of water lilies, both hardy and tropical, are raised, besides perennials, marsh and bog plants, shallow water flowers, and all the other items necessary to add beauty to pools and rock gardens. The popularity of goldfish for use as premiums as well as for use in home aquariums and garden pools offers another opportunity for those who like outdoor life. These are the Grassy Fork Fisheries at Martinsville, Indiana. The price for the goldfish runs from a nickel apiece for small common goldfish to $25 apiece, for the relatively rare Moore telescopes. The most interesting goldfish and also the most valuable specimen ever seen in America was the famous Liberty Bond fish, which was exhibited during the World War. The colors of this fish were red, white and blue, and it was used to attract crowds during Liberty loan drives of 1917 and 1918. The value placed on it at that time was $10,000. There is still a big market for goldfish among merchants and other businessmen who use them as premiums. The L. Fish Furniture Company, of Chicago, built its business, one of the largest in the world, that way. Fish furniture is sold on the installment plan. When a customer gets her account almost paid up, she is called upon by a salesman who presents her with a bowl of goldfish with Mr. Fish's compliments. That breaks the ice. The salesman then proceeds to find out if the customer has an electric refrigerator. If not, he sells her one, on the installment plan, of course. If she has a refrigerator, he sells her a washing machine or some other electric appliance. In this way, the company's customers are kept on the books year after year. Cleaning up on turkeys. When Mrs. Paul Engel, of Pulaski County, Indiana, decided to raise turkeys instead of chickens, she didn't realize the cleanup she was going to make. Everybody was raising chickens, Mrs. Engel said, but only a few were paying attention to turkeys. So I began with turkeys on a small scale. In 1933 we had 1,000 turkeys which we sold at Christmas time at 20 cents a pound, and we were well satisfied with our profits. As the average turkey ran to a little over 10 pounds and her cost for each of the birds was about 50 cents, she had a profit of about $1,400 for that one season. The work connected with the care and raising of the turkey poults did not bother Mrs. Engel in the least. Work, she said, is a tonic for anybody. She converted the former chicken house on the farm into a large turkey house. It was a big job but proved worth the effort. As she places day-old poults in this turkey house, everything connected with it must be kept safe and sanitary. Before placing the baby poults in the old chicken house, the floor, which is cement, was scrubbed with lye water. Every piece of equipment was cleaned and scrubbed, and the house fumigated. A sun pen was built just outside this chicken house. The sun pen was a collapsible affair, arranged so that it could be quickly taken down, and put out of the way. It consisted of frames covered with wire, and cost but little to make. In good weather, The young poults were permitted to run in this sun pen. After the oats harvest was completed, the turkey poults were turned into a small oat field, which was used as a turkey range. The entire cost of rearranging the chicken house and building the turkey pen was less than $100. Mrs. Engel did not buy brooders and incubators for the turkey poults, but utilized the equipment on the premises which had been used for raising chickens. Sanitation, Mrs. Engel believes, is an all-important element in successful turkey raising. Too much care cannot be given the pens to keep them free from infectious diseases. Once a week she has clean straw spread on the floors of the turkey house after soiled bedding is removed. When anyone enters the turkey house where the young poults are kept, he must put on rubber boots that have been thoroughly disinfected just before entering. We cannot be too careful about this, Mrs. Engel explained. Without such precaution, blackhead infection could be tracked in from the ground over which the chickens have run. Although Mrs. Engel has increased the number of turkeys on the farm to about 3,000, the cost of raising each poult has steadily decreased until now it is close to 27 cents each. She emphasizes the fact that it is not the cost of feeding which checks profits, but careless handling. Careless handling causes the poults to die from disease and then the crop goes into the red. Day-old poults may be secured from one of the big poultry farms at very small cost. A small turkey flock does not require a big area for ranging, for as many as 100 birds may be brought to maturity on an average city lot. Such birds are carefully shipped either by parcel post or by express, and with ordinary care 90% will mature for market, giving a high percentage of profit to the raiser. Raising Irish Terriers. What you can do with the hobby you have acquired has been demonstrated by Jules Beaumont, who a few years ago acquired the lease of a garage on the rear of a building lot near Chicago's Gold Coast and started his own kennels. Beaumont had been given 2 pedigreed Irish Terriers, and was so attached to them that he had rented the vacant garage property as a home for the dogs and their puppies. People in the neighborhood noticed the fine breed and form of the animals, and stopped to buy the puppies. He held his prices high, not caring whether he sold them or not, and before he realized it, he was in the money in a big way. He has been averaging better than $300 a month from the sale of blooded dogs and supplies, ever since. I am touching on a controversial subject when I mention dog intelligence, declared Beaumont, but I believe the owners of Irish Terriers will agree that they are about the most intelligent of the dog kingdom. These terriers I had at the beginning had good pedigrees, and they never failed to attract the attention of anyone passing the kennels. One day a woman wanted one so badly for her boy, then about 15, that I couldn't resist selling it, though I didn't want to. In the end she paid $150 for it. I thought that was a lot of money at the time, so let her have it. I had 4 puppies of the Irish Terrier breed, but within a week, friends of that woman had called, and each insisted on getting one of those puppies. As orders came in for the pups of the next litters, I decided to go into dog breeding. At this time, I didn't have any money left that I could invest in additional dogs, so I cared for and watched over those I had. When the litters came in, I notified the people who had ordered. I made enough from the sale of the dogs to break even during the first 6 months, and got a good profit out of the sale of accessories, such as dog food, harnesses, leashes, and dog medicines. There were other sources of profit. Few people can see a cute puppy without handling it a great deal. Some make it play until it's tired. Others feed it too much. The pup, therefore, from well-meant overdoses of kindness in one direction or another, becomes run down, and suffers from various types of illness. In addition, pups are subject to worms, and frequently the owner neglects to worm them. The result is a sluggish, sick puppy. These are but a few of the abuses a dog receives almost from the day it is bought. As the kennel from which the dog was secured is the first place the owner goes for advice and treatment, one soon accumulates sidelines that are profitable, and cost but little. For instance, many dogs that are seemingly ill only need to be placed in a warm dry spot and left without food for a day or so. This treatment means little or no expense to the kennel, but, of course, the owner is glad to pay well for getting his dog back in good condition. As a rule, a litter will have 2 males or more and 1 or 2 females. The males are always in big demand and bring good prices, the females are generally lower priced. The females from my first litters were sold, but I kept those from subsequent litters for breeding, and in 2 years have greatly increased the productivity of the kennels. Later I added other popular breeds as I found there are certain breeds of dogs which capture the public favor and for which people will pay more money than others. In this group are the Sealyham, Pekingese, Pomeranian, wire-haired Fox Terrier, Dalmatian, and some Collies. Many believe that it requires a lot of money to start a kennel. This, however, is a myth. I never had much money until after I had a good start in the kennel business. As a matter of fact, my total investment for blooded stock was less than $300. It cost me about $70 to turn the abandoned garage into a suitable kennel for dog breeding. I discovered that while you may have little trouble selling a few puppies to people who pass your kennels, you have to do a little merchandising to sell a good many dogs. I use the easiest method, which is holding a dog show at the kennels. I don't place dogs I have for sale in these kennel shows, but enter only the dogs of my customers and their friends. Those who condition their dogs properly are the owners who receive the blue and gold ribbons. These dog shows not only attract new customers, but also increase the sale of supplies and accessories. They are open to all blooded dogs whose owners care to enter them. You may start an Irish Terrier kennel in your home. A good female is usually all the stock you need to start, and may be purchased for around $40 to $50. When old enough, she may be put at stud with a pedigreed male at one of the first-class kennels. The fee for studding is usually one male of the litter. By retaining the females of each litter, you soon will be able to have a number of puppies for sale. If you are unable to get good prices, yourself, or want to sell wholesale only, any kennel, recognized by the American Kennel Club, will buy your puppies, and resell them for you. Quick profits from mushrooms. When Laz Lewin made up his mind to start a business of his own, he decided to do something different. Learning that mushrooms may be profitably grown in cellars, sheds, barns or garages, Lewin bought a small quantity of mushroom spawn, rigged up a mushroom bed in his cellar, and started to raise mushrooms. This wasn't a new idea. Home cultivation of mushrooms has been attempted for many years, but during the past few years new methods have been developed which greatly increase the profits in this business. It was a new idea in Memphis, Tennessee, Lewin's hometown, however, and his venture won quick approval from local storekeepers, restaurants, cafes and similar establishments. I never saw a mushroom grow before I started raising mushrooms, admitted Lewin. I was somewhat surprised at the suddenness of their growth, and realized the meaning of the old saw, grows like a mushroom. I started with a mushroom bed 100 feet in area. It cost me $2 to make this bed, 10 feet by 10. Then I ordered the seed, or spawn as it is called by mushroom growers. When it reached me, it looked like a mass of tangled white threads. I planted it, carefully following instructions, and 2 weeks later a white substance, appearing like cobwebs, covered the bed. Over this I spread ordinary backyard dirt, and waited for another 3 weeks. One morning, upon going into the cellar to look at this bed, I was amazed to see it covered with baby mushrooms. This was a surprise, for nothing had been there the night before. I wondered how long it would take to develop these baby mushrooms for market, but the next day, when I saw the mushrooms had increased in size 10 times, I picked them. I averaged a little over 2.5 pounds per square foot for the 100 square feet in the bed and sold this entire crop to local markets at an average price of 45 cents a pound. My investment in spawn was slightly over $8, which with the $2 for making the bed, comprised my total cost. I received approximately $110 for my crops. It was then I fully realized what a profit there could be in raising mushrooms. I increased my mushroom beds with the profit from this first crop and soon had 1,000 square feet in production. At 45 cents a pound, I easily sold the entire crop. As I have no rent, overhead, special equipment, or marketing expenses, I enjoy an advantage over the commercial grower. Up to that time, the local market held up well, and there appeared to be no reason why I should not increase my growing space. I knew that the company from which I bought my spawn was also a commission merchant with branch mushroom receiving stations located throughout the country and that it was licensed by the U.S. Department of Agriculture to purchase mushrooms from home growers and resell them to local retail stores. These people guarantee to buy every pound of mushrooms sent to them at the current wholesale market price. Moreover, they pay the shipping charges on shipments of 5 pounds or more. With an assured market, I increased the size of my mushroom beds, using more of the space formerly wasted about my home. The pure white variety of patented mushroom I have been raising brings top prices for my crops. I was lucky, I guess, when I picked out this particular variety. Mushrooms are easily raised as they require but little attention. Sunshine not being essential to their development, they will grow as well under the cellar stairs as in a pleasantly lighted room. In fact, bright sunlight is really not desirable according to experienced growers. The market for mushrooms is wide and profitable. The ability to supply fresh stock at all times, and give quick delivery service, ensures attractive profits. The cost of spawn for raising a pound of mushrooms varies between 4.5 and 6 cents. Persons shipping to wholesale and commission houses find sufficient profit margin between the prices received and their actual cost, to operate profitably. Generally, the best plan is to sell some of your crop in your own community, at higher prices, and to ship the remainder. Some growers, like Mr. Lewin, prefer the new type of spawn which produces a patented pure white mushroom, since it enables the grower to use ordinary cellars and sheds without making expensive alterations for insulation. Advertising makes farm pay. It was not until the Arthur Wolf Farms, Tippecanoe County, Indiana, erected one-ad signs, that business really did pick up. These signs are the billboard type and bear the name, post office and telephone address of the farm, at the top. Under this information are 2 columns with the headings, for sale and wanna buy. These columns are so arranged that the farmer can insert listings which are painted on removable sheets of metal. Whenever the farm has something to offer or is in the market to buy, Mr. Riley, the manager, inserts the proper metal strips under the correct headings. Under the for sale heading, will be such items as mules, sheep, clover hay, bread gilts, oats, alfalfa, shoats, feeding cattle, machinery, hay feeders, haycorn, etc. Whenever Mr. Wolf needs any kind of hay, livestock, clover or alfalfa hay, oats, hogs, etc., a sign specifying the need is put up under the heading, wanna buy. As Mr. Wolf's livestock operations are rather extensive, and there are many cattle and hogs to feed, there are times when he needs hay or corn. Then he will buy from anyone passing on the highway who sees his sign and has the right product to sell him. When the farm is short of stock and long on feed, the truckers become the buyers. The last crop of turkeys and hogs were all sold by this sign. Whenever there is a surplus of any stock or produce, the sign usually sells it in a few days. From time to time, feeder cattle or hay may be auctioned in the field. The sign tells the passerby several days ahead of time about the auction. 2 signs are in use all the time on this farm of 1,050 acres, one on each side of the place where the highway intersects the property line. Is there an idea here for a business of your own in selling and installing signs like these for the wide-awake farmers in your locality? Chapter 5. Things to invent and patent. The closer your business comes to being a monopoly, the surer you will be of success. Here in America there is a good deal of confusion over the meaning of monopoly. To some people it means taking advantage of small competitors by unfair practices. But since the days of Elizabethan charters and patents, a monopoly has meant protection against competition. Sometimes a monopoly was granted by the state in the form of a patent or grant, but more often it was obtained by the businessman or tradesman by virtue of his membership in a guild. The last official act signed by Queen Elizabeth was to annul the British Monopolies Act. What forms of monopoly do we find in American business? First, we have the trust or holding company, which enjoys a monopoly by virtue of buying out all its competitors, thus giving itself a clear field to charge all the traffic will bear. Such monopoly is based on financial power. It is a pistol pointed at the heart of the small, independent businessman. It is the type of monopoly which Theodore Roosevelt attempted to crush with his trust-busting activities. Some businessmen still believe his method is the answer to ruthless competition. The use of such power to obtain a trade monopoly is un-American in its conception, uneconomic if carried to its logical conclusion, and would inevitably lead to a monopoly of monopolies and finally monopolize the functions of government. But there is another kind of monopoly fostered by the government, which is just as much in the public interest as the other sort of monopoly is against it. Under that classification comes the monopoly of skill. That is the best monopoly of all. It is the monopoly that is enjoyed by the man who can build a better mousetrap or paint a better picture, write a better book, design a better dress or excel in any field. The very fact that you can do one little thing better than anyone else in the world can do it, assures your success. And although the monopoly granted for one achievement is limited as to duration, the success will continue so long as you make good your monopoly by keeping ahead of the imitators who are always found in the wake of success. Then, there is the monopoly that comes from location. For example, it is a well-known fact that on the island of Bermuda, a certain group of people pretty well control the island. These best families protect native businessmen against the encroachment of newcomers who seek to exploit the island. How do they do it? Very simply. You go over to Bermuda on a trip, fall in love with the climate and decide to start an automobile agency there. It looks like an easy way to make a few $1,000s. Statistics show that the number of inhabitants per automobile is higher in Bermuda than in any other place in or around the United States. It looks like a wide-open opportunity. So you get an agency and hang out your shingle in Hamilton. But nothing happens. The first thing you find is that only government officials are licensed to drive automobiles on the island, that residents there don't want the smelly things rushing about killing people. Next you learn that it is not considered good form in Bermuda to patronize any business that has not the approval of the best families. Bermuda is a small place, and one who lives there feels the need of social contacts. People who patronize the wrong businessmen suffer a sudden social catastrophe. In that way a monopoly is granted to those whom the older families wish to have succeed, and failure usually overtakes those who try to muscle in. Another form of monopoly is to get an exclusive concession at a fair, or the exclusive local agency for some advertised product. When Eskimo ice cream bars were first put on the market, men paid fancy prices just for a local franchise to make these bars and sell them to the public. The rights to sell neon signs in a territory were sold to eager salesmen at prices ranging from $1,000 to $15,000. The Coca-Cola Company is another well-known concert which gives exclusive franchises to sales agents. It is worth noting, however, that in nearly every case where the sale of franchises has been used to finance a business, a large part of the money received for the franchises was used to pay for the initial advertising campaign. While there are cases of men selling patent rights to raise money, it is a difficult and usually a disappointing method of financing a new business. What goes with a patent? Most inexperienced people feel that if they invent something and are able to get it patented, they can make $1,000 very quickly, either by selling the patent on a royalty basis, or by selling the patent outright. They assume that because they have a patent, they have the federal government back of them to keep off poachers and pirates. There is danger in placing too much reliance on, and attaching too much importance to, a patent until it has been tested in a high court. For example, a number of advertising men have invented trick mailing cards, letters which fold down from the top, or some other device, and have applied for, and been granted, patents on these things. In many cases they have, on the strength of such patents, collected royalties from printers and others for the use of the idea. One large lithographer paid several $1,000s for a patent on a folded down letterhead, the patent covering any letterhead which had printing under the flap. There was nothing wrong with the patent. But if this patent claim was appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court, an infringement suit would probably be dismissed on the grounds that the patent covered an operation which was natural to a mechanic in the pursuit of his trade. English common law gives a mechanic definite protection, just as it protects businessmen from confiscation of capital without due process of law, and the question of whether a patent is for a real invention and not mere mechanical skill must be left to the judgment of the courts in view of evidence introduced on both sides of the controversy. There is also the possibility of somebody being able to show prior use of anything you may patent. A patent was recently granted for a pop-up idea and collection folders. It appeared to be a perfectly good patent, and hundreds of companies are paying the inventor a royalty for the use of the idea. Yet it is possible that this idea was used in Valentine's more than 2 years before its reinvention. If somebody wanted to go to the trouble of searching among collections of old Valentines and found a sufficiently similar idea, the patent could be invalidated by proving that it was not an original idea, and therefore the inventor was not entitled to the benefits of a government monopoly. Another hazard that goes with patents is the possibility of some person improving upon your patent or otherwise changing it just enough to get around your patent claims. The idea, of course, is to make the claim as broad and as inclusive as possible, but because of earlier patents or printed publications, the claims must be limited to only the advance in the art which the inventor had made. Sometimes the only thing that can be patented is an accessory. That is why in taking out a patent you should go to a reputable and experienced firm of patent attorneys and stay clear of quacks who advertise for suckers. You will pay a reputable patent attorney a little more than the quack's advertised price, but the reputable attorney will tell you frankly if your invention is impractical and may even be able to help you to market it. Strangely enough, most of the outstanding inventions were made by outsiders. The principle of the steam engine, as everybody knows, was discovered by James Watt, who got the idea watching the lid of a teakettle jump up and down. It suggested to him an existence of power in steam, and he set about in his crude way figuring out how that power could be harnessed. Out of that invention came our present industrial system. Benjamin Franklin was not an electrician, but he invented the lightning rod. The Eastman Kodak Company paid $100,000 to a man who invented the device which enables you to write on the back of a film after it is exposed. And even the humble brake on a baby carriage was not invented, as you might suppose, by a carriage manufacturer, but by an advertising man in search of an exclusive feature to advertise. So do not feel that just because you do not know all there is to know about a particular product that you cannot find ways to improve it. Strangely enough, a person who is using a thing is often the one to think of an improvement, rather than the man who makes it, and the maker is eager to pay him either a lump sum of cash for the patent or a royalty on it. Improving the appliances and things that you use in your daily work is perhaps the easiest and most practical way to make money on patents. It is not much of a trick to get $1,000 from a large manufacturer for any worthwhile improvement, which you develop and patent. There are 100 ways to make $1,000 right in the kitchen of your home. In spite of the thousands of existing patents, there is still a need of a better can opener, a better close pin, a better bottle opener, and other simple everyday things that are in daily use. As a rule, simple inventions are the most profitable. The hump hair pin is a case in point. For years women had been using and losing straight hair pins. The pins fell out of the hair because there was nothing to hold them in. Then some bright fella thought about putting a little kink in the wire. It was so simple it seemed unimportant. Yet a great business has been built up in Chicago, and millions of dollars have been made on hump hair pins. On the other hand, This same chap might have spent years inventing a dishwashing machine, only to find after inventing it that people had to be educated to wash dishes by machine and that there were already a dozen on the market. If you are of an inventive or deductive turn of mind, and have an ambition to make some money on a patent, first be sure your market exists before spending time and money on an invention. Of the large number of patents issued annually, a portion are taken out by corporations to protect their development work in improving upon their products, or their production methods and apparatus, which have already been more or less approved in the market. Often corporations will also take out patents on alternatives or substitutes which they do not intend to exploit, but merely to hold, to forestall competitors adopting them. But of the other patents, those issued to freelance inventors, perhaps 9 out of 10 patents are on inventions which prove to be of practically no commercial importance. Generally, this is not so much because the invention lacks merit as because there is an inadequate commercial field for it. There are many reasons why the commercial